The smile on my father's face didn't disappear all at once. It happened slowly right after I said the words that ended everything. Then Thanksgiving is canceled. The room went quiet. My sister stopped stirring her coffee. My father's hand paused halfway to his cup. The saucer clicked softly against the table. Nobody spoke for several seconds. What happened after that destroyed a family illusion I had believed in for 34 years. And looking back now, I don't think Thanksgiving was ever the real issue. I think it was the moment everyone finally stopped pretending. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm a major in the United States Army. And this started 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. The call came on a Sunday afternoon. I had just finished mowing the lawn outside my townhouse. The Virginia air carried that familiar late autumn smell, dry leaves, wood smoke from somewhere down the street, and the faint promise of colder weather ahead. Thanksgiving had always been my favorite holiday. Not because of the food, not because of tradition, because it was the one day every year when I could convince myself we were still a family. I was cleaning grass clippings from the driveway when my father called. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Sure." His voice sounded casual. Too casual. Emily and I were talking. That should have warned me. Whenever Dad said he and Emily had been talking, it usually meant a decision had already been made. "We thought we'd do Thanksgiving at Emily's this year." I waited, not because I was upset, because I assumed there was more. There usually was. "We're trying something different," he added. I looked across the neighborhood. A little boy was throwing a football with his grandfather in the yard across the street. "Okay," I said. My father seemed surprised. "You don't mind?" "No." Another pause. Then he laughed lightly. "Good. Emily thought you might take it personally." That comment stayed with me long after the call ended. Not because it was cruel. Because it sounded familiar. For most of my life, my family assumed my feelings were the problem, not the behavior that caused them. I didn't think much about it at first. I had meetings the next day, training schedules to review, soldiers depending on me. Life moved on. Then Emily called. Unlike Dad, she sounded nervous. "Are we okay?" she asked. I leaned back in my office chair. "What do you mean?" "About Thanksgiving." "We're fine." Another silence. Then she sighed. "Good." Something in her voice pulled me backward through time. Because despite everything, Emily wasn't a monster. That would have been easier. When I was 8 years old, a group of older kids cornered me on the playground. Emily was 11. She marched straight into the middle of them and told them to leave me alone. When our mother spent weeks in the hospital years later, Emily practically lived in my room making sure I slept. Those memories were real. So were the others. The college tuition my parents paid for. The car. The wedding. The financial help that always seemed available when Emily needed it. People like simple villains. Real families are usually more complicated than that. By the time Thanksgiving approached, I had almost forgotten about the conversation. Then Dad suggested we meet for coffee. The three of us. Just family. That should have been my second warning. We met at my house the following Saturday. Outside, orange leaves drifted across the deck behind the kitchen windows. Inside, coffee brewed while a football game played quietly on television. The same way it always had during Thanksgiving season. For a few minutes, everything felt normal. Then Dad cleared his throat. "We wanted to tell you in person." I looked up. Emily stared into her mug. Dad folded his hands. "We won't be spending Thanksgiving with you this year." The wording caught my attention. Not hosting. Not location. With you. A small difference. A meaningful one. I sat quietly. Years in the Army teach you not to react too quickly. People often reveal more when you let silence do the work. Dad shifted in his chair. Emily finally spoke. "We just thought it'd be easier this year." Easier. Maybe that was true. Emily's marriage had been under strain for months. Her husband traveled constantly. Money was tighter than she'd admit. I knew all of that. Still something felt off. I looked around the kitchen. The framed family photos. The recipe cards Mom had written by hand years ago. The dining table where we'd shared countless meals. Then I realized something. Nobody had asked what my plans were. Nobody had asked whether I wanted to come. The decision had already been made. I wasn't being invited. I was being informed. For a moment I felt the old familiar disappointment. The one I knew from childhood. The feeling of arriving second. Then something unexpected happened. It passed. Just like that. No anger. No argument. Just clarity. I took a sip of coffee. Okay. Both of them visibly relaxed. Dad leaned back. Emily smiled. The conversation they assumed was over. Then I set my cup down. Then Thanksgiving is canceled. This time nobody relaxed. Dad frowned. "What does that mean?" His fingers tightened around the handle of his mug. It means exactly what it sounds like. Emily blinked. Sarah. I looked at both of them. Calmly. Not dramatically. Just honestly. You made plans based on a lot of assumptions. Dad's expression hardened. What assumptions? I almost answered immediately, then decided not to. Because the truth was I wasn't entirely sure yet. I only knew something had shifted. For years I'd carried responsibilities nobody talked about. Arranged things. Paid for things. Handled problems. Not because anyone forced me. Because I believed family meant showing up. Now, sitting across from them, I wondered whether anyone had noticed. Or whether they simply expected it. The grandfather clock near the hallway ticked softly. Nobody spoke. Finally, Dad said, I think you're overreacting. Maybe a year earlier I would have argued. Not this time. I stood and carried my empty coffee cup to the sink. Outside, another gust of wind scattered leaves across the yard. Thanksgiving was less than 3 weeks away. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't worried about saving the holiday. I was starting to wonder why I'd spent so many years trying to save things that nobody else seemed interested in protecting. Behind me, Dad and Emily exchanged a look. I didn't know it then, but that quiet afternoon would become the first crack in a story my family had been telling itself for decades. And once that crack appeared, the truth wasn't far behind. After my father and Emily left that afternoon, I did not cancel anything. Not right away. I stood in the kitchen for a long time with my hands resting on the edge of the sink, watching 2 coffee cups sit untouched on the counter. Dad had left his half full. Emily's still had a pale ring of cream floating on top. Small things tell the truth before people do. Outside, the last leaves scraped along the deck boards. Inside, the house felt too still. The television was still on in the living room, the football announcers talking over crowd noise as if nothing important had happened. For years, Thanksgiving had been a military operation in civilian clothes. I knew when to order the turkey, which cousin needed gluten-free stuffing, which uncle would complain if the cranberry sauce came from a can, which niece liked extra marshmallows on the sweet potatoes. I knew Dad liked pecan pie, but always pretended pumpkin was fine if nobody remembered. I remembered. That was the problem. I remembered everything. The next morning, I opened my laptop before sunrise and pulled up the holiday spreadsheet I had used for years. It was practical, color-coded, almost embarrassing in its precision. Groceries, cleaning, catering backup, guest rooms, rental chairs, travel reimbursements. I stared at the total at the bottom. It was higher than I wanted to admit. Not shocking. Just heavy. The kind of number that makes you realize generosity can turn into a habit before you notice it has become a burden. I closed the spreadsheet. Then I opened the folder for the lake house. The lake house had been in my mother's family for decades. It sat outside Charlottesville, a weathered white house with blue shutters, a long dock, and a screened porch that smelled like cedar and old rain. When I was a child, Mom used to sit out there with coffee in the morning, wrapped in one of Dad's flannel shirts, watching fog lift off the water. After she died, nobody wanted to talk about the house. There had been medical bills, estate confusion, old property taxes nobody had handled properly. My father was grieving and angry. Emily was drowning in her own life, 2 small children, a marriage already showing hairline cracks, and a husband who was either working late or not answering his phone. So I stepped in, quietly. That part was true. But the truth was not that nobody knew. Dad knew I had helped. Emily knew I had signed papers. What they did not know or did not want to know was the difference between helping and owning. At the time, I did not correct them. I told myself it was kinder that way. The family was raw. Mom was gone. Everyone wanted something familiar to survive her. So when Dad kept calling it your mother's place, I let him. When Emily told her kids we're going to the family lake house, I let that go too. What was I supposed to say? Actually, I paid the back taxes, repaired the roof, handled the probate mess, and bought out the estate interest so the bank wouldn't take it. Number. I was 31, exhausted, and still trying to hold together the pieces Mom had left behind. Silence seemed easier. Silence usually does until it sends you a bill. By Tuesday, the calls started coming. First from Aunt Linda. What time are we coming this year? I hesitated. You should ask Dad. That got quiet. Your father said Emily was hosting. Then Emily should know. Linda breathed out through her nose. Sarah. Just my name. Not judgment. Concern. I softened. I'm not organizing it this year. Another pause. Then she said maybe that's overdue. That surprised me. Aunt Linda had always been careful. She had her opinions, but she wrapped them in politeness and church lady restraint. What does that mean? I asked. It means your mother used to worry about this. I sat back. About Thanksgiving. About you doing too much. The words landed in a place I had kept sealed for years. Before I could ask more, she changed the subject, asked about work, then hung up. But the comment stayed with me. Your mother used to worry about this. That night I went to the storage closet and pulled out 3 plastic bins labeled Mom. I had avoided those bins for years. Inside were old photographs, recipe cards, birthday candles in a sandwich bag, a scarf that still faintly smelled like lavender if I held it close enough. At the bottom of the second bin, beneath a stack of church bulletins and medical paperwork, I found a manila envelope with my name written on it in Mom's handwriting. Sarah. Just that. My throat tightened. Inside were copies of old financial documents, a letter from an attorney's office, and a handwritten note. I read the note twice before the words made sense. Your father and I started this for your education. No matter what path you choose, I want you to have options. You have always been braver than you know. I sat on the floor until my legs went numb. The document behind it referenced an education account. Not a huge fortune, but enough. Enough to change things. Enough that 18-year-old me might not have felt forced to choose between debt and enlistment. I did not sleep much that night. The next morning I called Rebecca Nguyen, the attorney who had helped me secure the lake house after Mom's estate became tangled. Rebecca remembered me immediately. Major Mitchell, she said, what can I do for you? I told her I had found old documents and wanted to understand what they meant. Her answer was simple. Send them over, I'll look. 2 days later she called back. Her voice had the careful tone professionals use when they have bad news, but don't want to sharpen it unnecessarily. Sarah, these documents appear to reference an education account established by your mother. Your father was listed as custodian after her death. I stood in my office doorway watching soldiers cross the parking lot below. Does it still exist? I don't know yet, but there are records we can request. I already knew. Somewhere deep down I knew. Still knowing and proving are different things. That evening Emily texted, Dad says you're being cold. Can we please not make this ugly? I looked at the message for a long time. Then I typed back. I found Mom's education account documents. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again, then nothing. No answer came that night. The next morning Dad called. I let it ring twice before answering. What papers, he said. No hello, no confusion. Just that. What papers? I looked at the manila envelope on my kitchen table. The same table where he had sat days earlier telling me they would not spend Thanksgiving with me. Mom's, I said. His breathing changed. Barely. But I heard it. Sarah, you're digging up things you don't understand. I ran my thumb along the edge of the envelope. Then help me understand. He said nothing. Outside, a delivery truck rolled past the house. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. Finally, he spoke. Your sister needed help back then. There it was. Not an explanation. A confession wearing an excuse. I closed my eyes for 1 second. When I opened them, the kitchen looked the same. The coffee maker, the sink, the November light through the blinds. But something in my life had shifted permanently. Dad kept talking. You were strong. You had the army. Emily had 2 kids and a husband who couldn't keep a steady paycheck. I did what I thought was necessary. I did not raise my voice. A raised voice would have given him somewhere to hide. So you used Mom's money for Emily. It was family money. No, I said. It had my name on it. He went quiet. I could hear him breathing through the phone. Then he said softer, You don't know what it was like after your mother died. That was the closest he came to sounding human. And for a moment I saw him as he must have been then, a widower, frightened, proud, raised poor enough to believe security had to be handed to the child who looked most likely to fall. But understanding a wound does not excuse what it becomes. I know what it was like for me, I said. He did not answer. And that silence told me more than any apology could have. By the time the call ended, I had not canceled Thanksgiving. But I had canceled something else. The quiet agreement that my pain would stay private so everyone else could remain comfortable. The week before Thanksgiving arrived with the kind of cold rain that seems to settle over everything. Gray sky, wet sidewalks, bare trees rattling in the wind. I spent most of that week working. That was one of the benefits of military life. Schedules didn't care about family drama. Soldiers still needed training. Reports still had deadlines. Equipment still had inspections. In some ways I was grateful for that. Structure leaves less room for obsession. Still, every evening when I returned home, the same questions were waiting. What exactly had happened after Mom died? How much did Emily know? And perhaps the hardest question of all, had my father ever seen a difference between helping Emily and choosing her? Rebecca called the following Thursday. I was sitting in my truck outside a grocery store parking lot when her name appeared on my phone. The windshield wipers swept away a thin layer of drizzle as I answered. Hi, Rebecca? I received additional records. The tone of her voice told me enough. Not anger. Not surprise. Certainty. I rested my arm on the steering wheel. Okay. The account existed exactly as the document suggested. She paused. There were multiple withdrawals over several years. I looked through the windshield at people pushing shopping carts through the rain. Ordinary lives. Ordinary Thursdays. Yet somehow my own world felt suspended. Do the records show where the money went? Most of it, yes. I closed my eyes briefly. The answer no longer shocked me. That phase had passed. What remained was something quieter. A slow ache. Rebecca continued. Tuition payments, vehicle financing assistance, several large transfers connected to wedding expenses. Emily. Exactly as Dad had implied. Exactly as I had feared. I thanked Rebecca and ended the call. Then I sat in the truck for nearly 20 minutes without starting the engine. Rain tapped softly against the roof. I thought I might feel anger. Instead, I mostly felt tired. Not because of the money. People always assume financial betrayal is about money. Usually it isn't. It's about priorities. Money simply leaves a paper trail. The real wound is discovering where you stood in someone's heart when difficult choices had to be made. That evening Emily called. I almost let it go to voicemail. Almost. Instead, I answered. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she sighed. I talked to Dad. Of course she had. What did he tell you? Enough. The answer was careful. Too careful. I waited. Eventually she said, Sarah, I honestly didn't know where the money came from. For the first time since this started, I believed her immediately. Not because Emily never lied, because if she had known, she would have defended herself differently. People guilty of something usually prepare arguments. Emily sounded lost. The way people sound when they're discovering something unpleasant about themselves. I believe you, I said. A small silence followed. Then she laughed sadly. I don't know if that makes me feel better. Neither did I. For a while we talked about things we hadn't discussed in years. Not the money. Not Thanksgiving. Childhood. Mom. The lake house. Memories. At one point, Emily started laughing about an old summer storm that knocked out power for 2 days. You were terrified. I was 8. You slept in my room. You told me ghosts couldn't get through windows. She laughed again. So you do remember. The conversation caught me off guard, because it reminded me of something I had been forgetting. Family relationships rarely break in a straight line. The same sister who benefited from unfair treatment was also the girl who taught me how to ride a bicycle. The same sister whose wedding received money meant for my education once sat beside my bed all night while I had the flu. Both things could be true. Real life is uncomfortable that way. Toward the end of the call, Emily grew quiet. David moved into an apartment. Her husband. I gripped the phone tighter. I'm sorry. Yeah. She laughed without humor. I think we've been pretending things were okay for a long time. The sentence landed harder than she probably intended. Because it wasn't just about her marriage. It described our entire family. Before hanging up, she asked something unexpected. Are you coming on Thanksgiving? I stared out the kitchen window. The neighbor across the street was hanging Christmas lights despite the rain. I haven't decided. Okay. Another pause. Then she added softly, For what it's worth, I miss you. The line went quiet after we said goodbye. I stood there for a long time. Not healed. Not reconciled. Just thoughtful. A few days later, Dad called again. This time I agreed to meet him. We chose a diner halfway between our homes. The kind of place where retired couples drank coffee for 3 hours and everybody knew the waitresses by name. When I arrived, he was already sitting in a booth. A cup of coffee rested in front of him, untouched. That was unusual. Dad usually drank coffee immediately. Now he simply stared at it. For the first time, he looked older than I remembered. Not weaker. Just worn. I slid into the booth across from him. Neither of us spoke right away. The waitress filled my cup and walked away. Finally, Dad cleared his throat. I wasn't fair. The words surprised me. Not because they were dramatic, because they were simple. Dad had spent most of his life avoiding simple truths. I waited. He looked down at the table. When I was growing up, we had nothing. I'd heard pieces of the story before. Never much. Dad rarely talked about childhood. My sister had to quit school and work. He rubbed his thumb along the coffee mug. When Emily started struggling financially, I kept seeing my sister. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The diner hummed around us. Silverware, coffee cups, low conversations, normal life continuing nearby. I thought I was protecting her. His voice had grown quieter. Maybe I was protecting myself from old memories. I believed him. That was the frustrating part. I genuinely believed he believed that. But good intentions don't erase consequences. I wasn't asking you to choose between us, I said. His eyes lifted. I know. A muscle moved in his jaw. That's the part I didn't understand. The conversation lasted nearly an hour. There was no grand apology. No tears. No miracle. Just two adults sitting across from each other looking at mistakes that could no longer be hidden. When we finally stood to leave, he hesitated. Then said something I had never heard from him before. I should have told you the truth years ago. I nodded. Yeah, because there wasn't much else to say. Healing is rarely dramatic. Most of the time it's just honesty arriving later than it should have. As Thanksgiving approached, I still hadn't decided whether I would attend Emily's dinner. But I knew one thing. If I went, I wasn't going to carry years of silence into that room with me. Not anymore. And for the first time, I suspected everyone else knew it too. Thanksgiving morning arrived cold and clear. The kind of morning that makes every sound seem sharper. I woke before sunrise as usual. Years in the army had trained my body to do that even when I didn't need to. For a few minutes I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the house. Nothing. No alarms. No rushing. No cooking schedule taped to the refrigerator. No last-minute phone calls asking where the serving trays were. For the first time in years, Thanksgiving morning belonged entirely to me. Downstairs I made coffee and turned on the television. The Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade filled the screen. Marching bands. Bright floats. Children waving from sidewalks in New York. Mom used to watch it every year while preparing dinner. She would leave the television on in the background while the smell of turkey and sage stuffing drifted through the house. I stood there holding my coffee mug and found myself smiling at the memory. Not because it didn't hurt. Because it still mattered. Around 9 o'clock my phone buzzed. A text from Emily. Dinner starts at 2. No pressure. Just wanted you to know you're welcome if you want to come. That was all. No guilt. No argument. No emotional manipulation. Just an invitation. I read it twice, then set the phone down. At 11 I drove to the lake house. Not because anyone asked me to. Because I needed to see it. The water was calm beneath a pale November sky. The dock creaked softly as small waves tapped against the wood. Most of the trees around the shoreline were bare now, their reflections stretching across the lake like dark brushstrokes. I walked onto the screened porch. Mom's porch. At least that's how I still thought of it. The cedar boards smelled exactly as I remembered. For a while I simply sat there. No phone. No television. No decisions. Just silence. On the way out I noticed something hanging beside the old coat rack. A faded photograph. I'd seen it hundreds of times. Mom, Dad, Emily, me. Taken during Thanksgiving nearly 20 years earlier. We were standing beside the turkey. Everyone smiling. For years I would have looked at that picture and focused on what wasn't there. What was unfair? What hurt? Instead I found myself thinking something different. Some of it had been real. Not all of it. But some. The love. The laughter. The good memories. Those things mattered too. By the time I returned to town it was nearly 2. I parked outside Emily's house and sat in the truck for a moment. Then I turned off the engine. Not because everything had been resolved. Because avoiding people forever isn't peace. It's just another kind of prison. The house was already full when I walked in. The smell hit me first. Turkey. Butter. Roasted vegetables. Pumpkin pie. Someone had cinnamon candles burning somewhere. Football played on the television in the family room. Children ran through the hallway carrying paper turkeys they'd made at school. It looked like Thanksgiving. Messy. Crowded. A little loud. Real. Emily saw me first. For a second she simply stared. Then she smiled. A genuine one this time. You came. Looks that way. She laughed softly. The tension between us wasn't gone. But it wasn't driving the conversation anymore. That felt like progress. The meal itself was awkward in places. Not terrible. Just honest. Which is often more uncomfortable. My father sat across from me. Several times I caught him looking in my direction. Each time he quickly looked away. Nobody mentioned the trust. Nobody mentioned the lake house. Nobody mentioned old arguments. That silence wasn't avoidance. It was restraint. Some conversations belong at Thanksgiving. Others don't. After dinner, people drifted into smaller groups. Football in one room, coffee in another, kids playing board games in the dining room. I was helping carry dishes into the kitchen when Aunt Linda touched my arm. "Walk with me." We stepped onto the back porch. The air was cold enough to sting. For a moment, we watched leaves tumble across the yard. Then she smiled. "Your mother would have liked this." I looked back through the window. Emily was laughing at something one of the kids had said. Dad stood near the sink drying dishes. Actually, drying dishes. That alone felt historic. "You mean the holiday?" "I mean the honesty." Linda tucked her hands into her coat pockets. "Families survive a lot of things." She glanced at me. "But they don't survive secrets very well." I thought about that after she went back inside. A little later, Dad joined me on the porch. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he handed me a cup of coffee. Exactly the way I liked it. 2 sugars. A little cream. He remembered. That surprised me more than it should have. The cold air drifted between us. Finally, he said, "Thank you for coming." I nodded. He stared out across the yard. "I'm still trying to figure out how to fix this." The honesty caught me off guard. Not because it was dramatic. Because it wasn't. No speeches, no promises. Just a man admitting he didn't have answers. For once, neither did I. "You may not be able to fix all of it." He looked down, then nodded. "I know." A long silence followed. Comfortable wasn't the right word, but it wasn't hostile anymore. That mattered. Eventually, he cleared his throat. "Your mother always said you were the strongest one." I laughed quietly. She also said I was stubborn. A small smile appeared. That too. For the first time in a long time, we stood together without fighting for a version of the past that no longer existed. The truth was already out. There was nothing left to defend. Nothing left to hide. Only choices about what happened next. As evening settled over the neighborhood, I helped clean dishes, packed leftovers, talked with cousins, played cards with my nephews, and little by little I realized something. The holiday wasn't saved. It wasn't ruined either. It had simply become something different. Smaller, more honest, more fragile, but perhaps more real than it had been in years. When I finally left that night, Dad walked me to my truck. He hesitated before speaking, then said quietly, "I'd like to see you again, not because of a holiday." I looked at him for a moment, then nodded. "We'll see." It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it wasn't goodbye. And for both of us, that was enough. The months after that Thanksgiving did not turn into some perfect family movie. There were no sudden Sunday dinners where everyone hugged and forgot. No dramatic Christmas miracle. No clean ending. For a while, my father and I met once a month at the same little diner halfway between our homes. Sometimes we talked for an hour, sometimes 20 minutes. Sometimes we mostly drank coffee while the waitress refilled our cups and pretended not to notice how careful we were with each other. He apologized in pieces, not all at once. That felt more honest. One morning in January, he said, "I should have asked what you needed." In March, he said, "I was harder on you because I thought you could take it." In May, he finally said, "That doesn't make it right." I didn't forgive him on command. I didn't punish him either. I simply listened. Some wounds don't close because someone says the correct words. They close because behavior changes long enough for the heart to believe it. Emily changed too, slowly. Her marriage ended that spring. She moved into a smaller house with the kids and took a job at a medical office. It wasn't glamorous, but she sounded proud when she told me about her first paycheck. "I haven't had my own money in years," she said. I could hear noise in the background. Her kids arguing over cereal, a dog barking, real life pressing in. "Feels good?" I asked. "Feels terrifying," she said. Then she laughed. "But yes, we were not close the way we had been as children. Maybe we never would be." But she stopped pretending the past hadn't happened. That mattered more than any speech. The next Thanksgiving, I hosted dinner at my house in Virginia. Not the lake house. My house. That distinction mattered to me. I invited Emily and the kids. I invited Dad. I invited Aunt Linda. I also invited 2 soldiers from my unit who couldn't travel home, an older widower from my church named Mr. Callahan, and a young military couple with a baby who slept through almost the entire meal. The house smelled like turkey, rosemary butter, and warm rolls. The parade played on television in the morning. Football took over after lunch. Someone spilled cranberry sauce on my table runner. One of Emily's boys dropped a dinner roll and blamed the dog even though I didn't own one. For the first time in years, I laughed without checking whether everyone else was comfortable. During dinner, Mr. Callahan raised his glass of iced tea. "To the people who make room at the table," he said. "Nobody made a big production of it." But my father looked at me, not with guilt, not with ownership, with something quieter, respect. Later that evening, while everyone packed leftovers into mismatched containers, Emily stood beside me at the sink. "You know," she said, drying a plate, "Mom would be bossing us around right now. She'd say the gravy was too thin." Emily smiled, and Dad would pretend not to hear her. We both looked toward the living room. Dad was on the floor helping my niece build a tower out of wooden blocks. He moved slower now, but he was trying. That was the word I kept coming back to. Trying. Not fixed. Not redeemed. Trying. That night after everyone left, I stood alone in the kitchen. The counters were messy. The trash bag was full. The house smelled like coffee pie and extinguished candles. I should have felt tired. Instead, I felt steady. A year earlier, when my father said he would not spend Thanksgiving with me, I thought I was being rejected. What really happened was simpler. I stopped accepting a role that had been handed to me before I was old enough to question it. I stopped confusing usefulness with love. I stopped calling silence peace. Family did not become easy after that. But it became honest. And honest was enough to begin again. Not from where we left off. From where the truth finally found us. If this story stayed with you, I'd like to hear from you. Have you ever had to step back from people you loved just to find peace again? Share your thoughts in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. And if you believe stories like this matter, stories about family courage, truth, and healing, please subscribe. There are more journeys waiting, and I'd be honored to walk through them with you. "You classified," Todd laughed so loud a woman on the courthouse steps turned around. Then he looked right at me with that little smile I used to mistake for confidence and said, "Melissa, please. You're not important enough for secrets." Our daughter heard him. That was the part I couldn't shake. Not the courthouse. Not the hearing I'd missed. Not even the fact that my ex-husband had spent the last 7 months trying to make me look like a careless mother in front of strangers. It was Emma standing there in her navy hoodie holding a paper cup of hot chocolate from the vending machine, pretending she hadn't heard her father say her mother was nobody. I was 44 years old, an Army intelligence analyst stationed near Fort Meade, Maryland, and I had learned how to sit through briefings where every word mattered and every reaction had to stay buried. But that afternoon outside the Baltimore County Circuit Court, I felt about 2 inches tall. Todd stood there with his attorney, a young guy in a gray suit who kept checking his phone like our family was an appointment running long. Todd had on his expensive wool coat, the camel-colored one he bought after the divorce, because Cheryl, his girlfriend, told him it made him look executive. He looked rested, trim, annoyingly polished. I looked like I had slept in my car, which technically I almost had. The night before, I'd been called in because of a classified cyber incident involving a defense contractor. That's all I can say, and honestly, that's more than I wanted to say even then. I got the call at 11:17 p.m. while I was folding Emma's basketball shorts on my bed and trying to remember whether I had paid the electric bill. By midnight, I was driving toward Fort Meade with a gas station coffee between my knees and my hair still damp from the shower. I left a voicemail for my attorney. I sent the only message I was allowed to send. Emergency duty requirement. Unable to appear. Documentation will follow through proper channels. That sounds cold when you write it down. It sounded cold to the court, too, I'm sure. But military life has a way of making your emergencies look like excuses to people who have never had to disappear into a building without windows. Todd knew that. He had lived with it for 19 years. He knew the phone calls that came at dinner. The birthdays I missed. The Christmas Eve when I had to leave a half-wrapped Barbie dream house in the hallway because something happened overseas that couldn't wait until morning. He knew how many times I had come home with my shoulders locked up and my jaw aching from holding back words I wasn't allowed to bring into my own kitchen. Back when we were young, he bragged about it. "My wife does work she can't even tell me about," he used to say at cookouts, puffing up like he had been handed a medal by association. But somewhere between our 10th anniversary and our daughter's middle school years, pride turned sour. I don't know the exact day it happened. Maybe nobody ever does. It was a slow thing. A comment here, a silence there, a little eye roll when my phone buzzed. A joke about how the Army got the best version of Melissa and we got the leftovers. People laughed when he said it. I laughed too. That's what embarrasses me now. The hearing I missed was supposed to be routine, or as routine as custody hearings can be when the man sitting across from you has decided the truth is too boring to win with. Todd wanted more control over Emma's schedule. He said I was unreliable. He said my work made me unavailable. He said Emma needed stability, which was rich coming from a man who introduced her to Cheryl 2 weeks after moving out. I had filed everything I was supposed to file. My attorney had already explained my service obligations. There were protections in place for situations like mine, but Todd didn't want protection. He wanted performance. He wanted me standing there in court embarrassed explaining things I couldn't explain. And when I didn't show, he used the empty chair like a weapon. By the time I got out the next afternoon, my phone had 26 missed calls. 6 from my attorney, 4 from Todd, 3 from my sister in Ohio, which told me Todd had been busy. The rest were a mix of unknown numbers, automated reminders, and one voicemail from Emma where she didn't say anything for 7 seconds before hanging up. That one hurt the most. I drove straight to the courthouse because I didn't know what else to do. I was still wearing yesterday's uniform under my coat. My boots had dried salt on them from the parking lot. My eyes burned so badly I had to blink hard at red lights. When I pulled up, the hearing was over. Todd was outside, and so was Emma. She looked at me like she wanted to run over and like she was afraid to. That's a terrible thing to see in your own child's face. Mom, she said. I touched her arm. Baby, I'm sorry. Todd made a sound through his nose. Not quite a laugh, worse, a little puff of contempt. Well, he said loud enough for his lawyer to hear. Look who found time. I kept my voice low. Todd not in front of Emma. Oh, now you care what happens in front of Emma. His attorney shifted, uncomfortable, but Todd was on a roll. He always got that way when he had an audience. I had an assignment, I said. I notified my attorney. A classified assignment, he said, drawing the words out like he was tasting something rotten. Then came the line. You, classified. Emma stared at the ground. That should have stopped him. It didn't. He leaned closer, smiling like we were sharing a private joke. Melissa, please. You're not important enough for secrets. I wish I could tell you I said something sharp back. Something brave. Something that made him look foolish right there on those courthouse steps. I didn't. I just stood there with my hands cold inside my coat pockets, feeling the weight of every year I had spent trying to be useful to everybody. Useful to the army. Useful to Todd. Useful to his mother when she got sick and he couldn't handle the smell of hospitals. Useful to Emma's school even if I had to answer emails at 2 a.m. Useful to a country that could ask everything from me and still require silence in return. And in that moment I could not even defend myself to my own daughter. Todd turned away first. He put a hand on Emma's shoulder like he had won something. Come on, he said to her. Let's get you home. Emma looked back at me once, just once. I drove to a Walgreens on York Road after that because I didn't trust myself to go home yet. I bought a bag of trail mix. I didn't want a bottle of water and a pack of tissues from a cashier who called me ma'am like I was somebody's tired aunt. I sat in my car with the engine off. The sky was low and gray. Rain ticked against the windshield in those tiny, irritating taps that make everything feel lonelier. My coffee from that morning had gone cold in the cup holder, and the smell of it mixed with the peanuts and chocolate in the trail mix until my stomach turned. I cried in short little bursts. Not pretty crying, not movie crying, the kind where you get mad at yourself halfway through and wipe your face too hard. Then my phone buzzed. It was my attorney. Melissa, do not contact Todd tonight. We need to talk first thing tomorrow. That message scared me more than Todd's laugh. Because my attorney was not dramatic. She was a 58-year-old woman named Denise Halpern who wore sensible shoes, kept peppermints in her desk drawer, and once told me panic is expensive. Don't do it unless you have to. So, if Denise was telling me not to contact Todd, something had shifted. I didn't know yet that Todd had done more than mock me. I didn't know he had tried to prove I was lying by dragging my military records into our divorce. And I definitely didn't know that by breakfast the next morning 2 men from a Defense Department security office would be standing in the lobby of his accounting firm in Arlington, asking who had given him access to my information. All I knew that night was that my ex-husband had laughed. And for the first time in a long time, I did not feel sad enough to forgive him. I felt quiet. That was new. I got maybe 3 hours of sleep that night. Not real sleep either. The kind where your body shuts down but your brain keeps pacing around the room like an anxious relative after a funeral. Every time I drifted off, I saw Emma's face outside the courthouse. Not crying. That would have been easier somehow. Just disappointed. I woke up before dawn with my neck stiff from sleeping on top of the blanket. My townhouse in Odenton was quiet except for the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. I stood there in my socks making coffee while the local news muttered in the background about rain on I-95 and a stalled tractor trailer near Laurel. Normal life. That was always the strange part about working around classified operations. The rest of the world kept going while yours tilted sideways. At 6:12 a.m., Denise called. I answered immediately. "You're awake," she said. "You sound disappointed. You sound tired." "I am tired." There was a pause. Papers shuffled on her end. "Melissa," she said carefully, "I need you to listen without interrupting me." That sentence alone made my stomach drop. Denise was not theatrical. She billed by the hour and hated wasted words. "What happened?" I asked. "Todd hired a private investigator." I leaned against the kitchen counter. "What?" "He apparently decided your military leave documentation wasn't enough for him. The investigator contacted someone connected to a defense contractor trying to verify your assignment status." I closed my eyes. "Oh no." "Exactly." I sat down slowly at the kitchen table. The chair made that familiar little creak I kept meaning to fix. "He actually did that. According to the information I received last night, yes. And now a Defense Department security office is involved because the inquiry touched protected personnel systems." I rubbed my forehead hard enough to leave marks. "Todd's an idiot." "No," Denise said quietly. "Todd is arrogant. Different problem." That landed harder because it was true. Todd had spent most of his life believing rules were flexible for people smart enough to bend them. He wasn't reckless in obvious ways. He paid taxes early, returned shopping carts, sent thank you cards after weddings. But he also thought consequences were things that happened to other people. "When did this happen?" I asked. "The investigator made contact 2 days ago. Whatever system got flagged probably triggered an automatic review." I stared out the kitchen window at my tiny backyard. The grass needed cutting. A plastic flower pot had tipped over near the fence during the storm. Ordinary things. Meanwhile, my ex-husband was apparently under some kind of federal microscope because he couldn't accept losing one hearing without turning it into a personal crusade. "Am I in trouble?" I asked quietly. "That depends on whether you did anything wrong." I didn't. "Then breathe." Easy for her to say. I spent 22 years building a reputation for discretion. One security review could make people look at you differently even if you'd done nothing wrong. In my world, suspicion stuck to people. Denise must have heard something in my silence. "Melissa," she said softer now, "this isn't your fault." I laughed once under my breath. "Feels like it." "That's because you're used to cleaning up other people's messes." That one sat with me after we hung up. Because she wasn't wrong either. By 8:30, I was inside a secure office at Fort Meade, trying to focus on a briefing while my thoughts kept drifting back to Todd. My supervisor, Colonel Harris, was going over timelines on a cyber incident, but all I could think about was my ex-husband standing in one of his tailored quarter zips, pretending he understood things he had no business touching. The room smelled faintly like burned coffee and printer toner. Somebody's pen kept clicking. I forced myself to pay attention. Military life teaches you compartmentalization whether you want it or not. Feel terrible later. Function now. Around mid-morning during a short break, my friend Dana caught me standing near the vending machine staring at a pack of peanut M&Ms like they'd personally insulted me. "You look awful," she said. "Thank you." "No, I mean emotionally awful. Your hair still looks government approved." That made me smile a little. Dana worked civilian intelligence support and had the driest sense of humor of anyone I knew. She was twice divorced, 60 years old, and believed all motivational wall art should be illegal. "What happened?" she asked. I hesitated. Then I gave her the safe version. Todd pushed too hard in court. Her eyebrows lifted, defined too hard. He hired someone to dig into classified adjacent records. Dana blinked slowly. "Oh, that man is stupid." "Apparently." "No, Melissa, not regular stupid, confident stupid." That phrase followed me the rest of the day, too. Confident stupid. Todd in a nutshell. At 11:04, my phone finally came back into my possession after the briefing cycle ended. 21 missed calls. 15 from Todd. 2 from Cheryl. 1 from Emma. And 3 from numbers I didn't recognize. I listened to Todd's first voicemail while sitting alone in my car. "Melissa, call me back immediately." No greeting. Second voicemail. "What the hell did you do?" Third voicemail. "I swear to God, if you're trying to scare me." Delete. Fourth voicemail was my favorite because I could actually hear panic underneath the anger. 2 federal investigators came into my office this morning asking questions about defense records. My employees were there, Melissa. Employees. Not family, not Emma, his employees. That told me exactly where his mind was. By lunchtime, Dana and I were sitting outside near the parking area, eating salads neither of us wanted, because we were both pretending to care about cholesterol now that we were over 40. Rain clouds hung low over the highway. Traffic crawled in the distance. "You gonna call him back?" Dana asked. "No." "Good." I stabbed a tomato hard enough to launch it sideways across the container. "I didn't ask for any of this," I muttered. Donna looked at me for a second. "You know something?" she said. "Women like you always say that after years of carrying everybody else." I laughed tiredly. "What does that mean?" "It means men get very comfortable standing on your shoulders. Then one day you stop holding them up and suddenly they think you attacked them." That sounded uncomfortably accurate. Around 1:30, Emma texted me. "Dad looked weird today." I typed back immediately. "What do you mean weird?" 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then came back again, like he was scared. I stared at that sentence for a long moment. Not because I felt sorry for Todd exactly, I wasn't there yet, but because fear looked terrible on people who built their entire personality around being in control. A few minutes later, another text came through. One of the ladies at his office was crying. "What now?" Dana asked. I showed her the screen. She whistled softly. "Well, she said sounds like the kingdom's getting shaky." I should have felt satisfaction. Instead, I felt tired, bone tired. That's the thing people misunderstand about revenge sometimes. They imagine fireworks, victory speeches, somebody walking away in slow motion while dramatic music plays. Real life isn't like that. Most of the time, it's just sitting in a government parking lot with a plastic fork in your hand, wondering how your marriage turned into paperwork and security reviews. That afternoon, Denise forwarded me part of a formal notice connected to Todd's inquiry. Most of it was legal language, but one sentence stood out. Unauthorized attempts to obtain protected personnel information may trigger federal review procedures. I read it 3 times. Todd had done this to himself. Not me. Not the Army. Not some conspiracy against divorced middle-aged accountants. Todd. And suddenly I remembered something from years earlier. We were at a neighborhood barbecue in Columbia. Emma was little then, maybe 6 or 7, running around with glow sticks after dark. One of the husbands had joked that Todd must worry about me working around secrets all day. Todd laughed and threw an arm around my shoulder. "Oh, I trust Melissa," he'd said. "It's everybody else I don't trust." Back then, I thought that meant he loved me. Now I think it meant he couldn't stand not having access to every part of me. There's a difference. At 4:47 p.m., just before I left work, my phone rang again. Todd. I almost ignored it. Almost. Then I answered. What I said. Silence for half a second. Then very quietly. "Melissa, who are these people?" I leaned back in my chair. For the first time in months, my ex-husband did not sound smug. He sounded small. And somewhere deep down under all the exhaustion and anger and hurt, I realized something I hadn't let myself admit before. Todd never thought there would be consequences for humiliating me. That was beginning to change. I didn't answer Todd's question. Not right away. Partly because I honestly didn't know exactly who had visited his office, and partly because after years of being interrupted, corrected, explained over, and publicly translated by my own husband, I had developed a quiet appreciation for silence. "Melissa," he said again, lower this time, "I need you to tell me what's happening." I looked around my office before speaking. Most people had already gone home. The hallway outside was dim, except for the glow from the vending machines near the elevator. Somewhere down the corridor, somebody laughed too loudly at something on a speakerphone. Normal Thursday sounds. Meanwhile, my ex-husband sounded like a man standing barefoot in cold water. "I told you yesterday," I said evenly. "You should have left it alone." "That doesn't explain federal investigators showing up at my office." "They're not there because of me, Todd. They're there because of what you did." He exhaled sharply through his nose. "I was trying to verify whether you lied to the court. You hired a private investigator to poke around defense systems. I didn't know." "No," I cut in quietly. "You didn't care." Silence again. Then he slipped into that tone I used to hate most. Calm, reasonable, like he was the only adult left in the room. "You're overreacting." I actually laughed at that. Not because it was funny, because it was unbelievable. You had somebody try to access protected personnel information tied to military operations. It was attendance verification. It was classified adjacent. "You always do that," he snapped suddenly. "Do what? Make everything sound bigger than it is." There it was. The real thing underneath all the court filings and custody schedules and polished little speeches. Resentment. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes for a second because suddenly I was tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. Todd, I said quietly, you haven't believed my work mattered in years. That's not true. Really? He didn't answer. Because both of us knew it was true. Somewhere along the line, my career stopped being something he admired and became proof that I existed outside his control. That was the part he couldn't forgive. I have to go, I said. Melissa. I hung up. Then I sat there staring at my dark computer screen long enough to see my own reflection looking back at me. Tired eyes, gray threading through my hair near my temples. The little crease between my eyebrows that never fully went away anymore. 44 wasn't old, but it was old enough to feel the mileage of trying to be everything for everybody. By the time I got home, it was almost 7. Emma was already there. Todd had dropped her off early. That alone told me he was rattled. I found her sitting cross-legged on the couch, eating microwave popcorn straight from the bag, while some baking competition played on TV. Hey, I said softly. Hey. She didn't look up immediately. Teenagers can say entire paragraphs with silence. I set my keys down carefully. You hungry? I can make grilled cheese. You always make grilled cheese when you're stressed. That wasn't a no. That got the tiniest smile out of her. I made sandwiches while she sat at the kitchen island scrolling on her phone. Rain tapped lightly against the window over the sink. The kitchen smelled like butter and tomato soup from the can I heated beside the sandwiches. For a few minutes, things almost felt normal. Then Emma asked, "Are you in trouble?" I looked over my shoulder. "With work." She nodded. "No." "You sure?" "I'm sure." She picked at the label on her water bottle. Dad said people from the Pentagon came to his office. There it was. I should have known Todd would tell her. "Not exactly the Pentagon," I said carefully. "But government people." "Yes." Emma looked up finally. Were they mad? I thought about Todd's panicked voicemails, about his receptionist probably watching him sweat through his expensive dress shirt while investigators asked polite questions in the conference room. "Probably disappointed," I said. That made her laugh unexpectedly. "Dad hates disappointing people." "No," I said before I could stop myself. "Your father hates looking bad." The second the words came out, I regretted them. Emma noticed. "You still defend him," she said quietly. I turned back to the stove too fast. "What?" "You do." I flipped the grilled cheese even though it didn't need flipping. "Emma." "No, seriously," she shrugged, "even after everything. Kids see things you think you've hidden. That's the uncomfortable truth nobody tells you when you become a parent." I set the spatula down slowly. "I don't want you hating your dad." "I don't hate him." But Emma stared at the TV screen without really watching it. "He acts different now." That hurt because I knew exactly what she meant. Todd used to be warm, funny. The kind of father who built elaborate blanket forts and let Emma paint his toenails when she was little because making her laugh mattered more than his pride. But bitterness changes people gradually, like water damage inside walls. By the time you notice it, the structure's already weak. "Your dad's under stress," I said carefully. Emma snorted. "So are you." Fair point. We ate dinner in the living room because neither of us felt like pretending to be organized adults at a kitchen table. Halfway through the baking show, Emma muted the TV suddenly. "Can I ask you something?" "Always." "Did you really miss court because of work?" I blinked. "Of course." She looked embarrassed immediately. "I know that probably sounds dumb." "No," I said softly, "it doesn't." She tucked her legs underneath herself. Dad kept saying normal people don't disappear like that. That sentence sat heavy in the room. I looked down at my soup for a second before answering. "Military families aren't normal sometimes." Emma studied me carefully. "Did you ever wish you picked a different job?" I almost gave the automatic answer. The noble answer, the patriotic answer. Instead, I told her the truth. Yes. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "Really?" "There were birthdays I missed that I still think about." I smiled faintly. "And your middle school choir concert was honestly terrible, but I still hated missing it." That made her laugh. "The Titanic song. The very one." "You didn't miss much." "I know, but I missed you." The room got quiet again after that. Not uncomfortable quiet, just honest quiet. Then Emma said something that stayed with me for a long time. "Dad acts like your job was something you did to him." I stared at her. Because that was exactly it. Not something I did for our family. Not something that paid our mortgage, funded Emma's braces, covered hospital bills when Todd's mother got sick. Something I did to him. And suddenly a memory came back sharp as glass. 8 years earlier. A neighborhood barbecue. Todd holding a beer while talking to another husband near the grill. "The army got the ambitious version of Melissa," he joked. I got whatever was left over. Everybody laughed, including me. But later that night after guests left and Emma was asleep, I asked him if he really meant it. And Todd shrugged. Well, he said you're never fully here anymore. At the time I thought he meant emotionally. Now I think he meant something simpler. He hated not being the center of the room. Around 9:30 after Emma went upstairs, I sat alone in the kitchen, finishing cold tea and staring at old fingerprints on the stainless steel refrigerator. My phone buzzed again. A text from Denise. We need to discuss financial disclosures tomorrow. Found inconsistencies in Todd's filings. I frowned immediately. What inconsistencies? 3 dots appeared. Then, substantial ones. I leaned back slowly in my chair. And for the first time, a thought crossed my mind that made my chest tighten. Maybe this had never really been about custody. Maybe Todd wasn't trying to protect Emma at all. Maybe he was trying to protect money. Denise's office sat above a dental clinic in Towson, in one of those brick professional buildings that always smell faintly like carpet cleaner and old coffee. I got there at 8:05 the next morning carrying a legal pad, a travel mug, and a level of dread I did not have a good name for. The waiting room had 2 ficus trees, 3 copies of Southern Living, and a little dish of wrapped peppermints on the reception desk. Denise always said the peppermints were for clients who had to swallow bad news. I took 2. She came out wearing navy slacks, low black heels, and the expression of a woman who had already read something that annoyed her. Come on back, she said. That was not promising. Her office was neat in the way only experienced lawyers' offices are neat. Not pretty, functional. Stacks of files labeled with blue tabs, a framed diploma, a photo of her grandkids at Ocean City. One mug that said, "Billable hours are my love language," which I had always hated and respected at the same time. Denise shut the door. Todd has been underreporting income, she said. No warm-up. I sat down slowly. How much? We don't know yet, enough to matter. She slid a folder across the desk. Bank statements, business distributions, investment account summaries, things I had seen in pieces over the years but never all together. Todd was a CPA. Money was his language. He could make $10 look like 3 if it helped him win an argument. He claimed a drop in income, Denise said, tapping one page with her pen, but his firm paid out deferred compensation through a separate account. He also moved some consulting income into an LLC he didn't fully disclose. I stared at the paper. The numbers blurred for a second. This is why he wanted the ruling fast. That's my belief, she said. Your promotion package is pending correct. I nodded. If your income changes soon, that affects support calculations. If his hidden income comes out, that affects them even more. He had a financial reason to push hard now. There it was. The thing that made my stomach go cold. Not because I was shocked Todd cared about money. Of course he cared about money. He tracked grocery receipts during our marriage like I was laundering funds through Kroger. But custody, Emma, using our daughter's schedule as leverage before the numbers caught up with him. That was a different kind of ugly. I leaned back and looked at the ceiling. All this time he kept saying it was about stability. Denise's face softened. Sometimes people use noble words to cover ordinary greed. That sentence felt like someone turning on a light in a room I had been afraid to enter. I drove back toward Fort Meade in silence. No radio, no podcast, just the road noise and the GPS voice telling me things I already knew. Merge onto I-695. Keep left. Continue for 12 miles. The sky was clear for the first time in days, but I barely noticed. My mind kept jumping backward. Todd at 29, proud and handsome, in a wrinkled white shirt holding newborn Emma in Anne Arundel Medical Center like she was made of glass. Todd at 34 clapping too loudly when I got a commendation telling strangers, "That's my wife." Todd at 45 standing in our kitchen angry because I missed a dinner with one of his clients. Todd at 52 trying to use our daughter like a receipt. People like clean stories about divorce. One person good, one person bad. But long marriages don't break clean. They fray, they stain. They leave you defending someone who stopped defending you years ago. By that afternoon, Todd had apparently started calling mutual friends. I knew because my sister called me from Ohio while I was standing in the produce section at the Giant in Laurel, holding a bag of baby carrots I had no memory of picking up. "What is going on with Todd?" Rachel asked. "Hello to you too." He called Mark. Mark was my brother-in-law, a patient man who repaired school buses and believed every crisis could be solved with either duct tape or silence. What did Todd say? That you're using your military connections to intimidate him. I closed my eyes. In front of me, an older man in a Ravens sweatshirt squeezed avocados with the seriousness of a surgeon. Of course he did. Rachel lowered her voice. Mel, he sounded weird. Weird how? Fast. Angry. Like he was explaining something before anyone accused him. That sounded right. Guilt makes some people quiet. Todd had never been one of them. He's scared, I said. Should he be? I looked down at the carrots. Yes, I said, but not of me. That was the truth. I wasn't plotting some grand revenge. I wasn't calling in favors or pulling strings. I was barely keeping my laundry done. Todd was the one who had opened doors he didn't understand. That evening, he tried a different approach. At 6:18, he texted me a picture. It was old, very old. Me, Todd, and Emma at the National Aquarium in Baltimore. Emma was maybe 4, pressed against the glass with both hands while a stingray floated past. I was laughing at something Todd had said. He was looking at me, not the camera. For a second, I forgot to breathe. Then his message came through. We used to be good together. I don't want this to get ugly. I stood in my kitchen staring at the screen while a pot of pasta boiled over behind me. That was Todd's gift. He knew exactly where the soft places were. I remembered that day at the aquarium. Emma had spilled orange soda down the front of her shirt. Todd bought her a stuffed dolphin from the gift shop, even though I said it was overpriced. On the drive home, he held my hand over the console all the way through the harbor tunnel. We had been good together once. That was the cruelest part. Not every bad man starts bad. Some just get smaller over time and punish you for still growing. My thumb hovered over the screen. I almost wrote back. What do you want? That was how it always started. One reasonable question, one opening, one little crack where Todd could slide in and rearrange the room. Before I could answer, Emma came downstairs. She had her backpack slung over one shoulder and a look on her face that made me set the phone down. What's wrong? I asked. She leaned against the counter. Dad called. I turned off the burner. What did he say? He wanted to know if I remembered what we practiced. The kitchen went still. What you practiced? Emma swallowed. He said if anybody asked, I should say you choose the army over me. For a moment, I heard absolutely nothing. Not the pasta water bubbling. Not the refrigerator, not the neighbor's dog barking through the wall. Just that sentence sitting between us like something rotten. Emma's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. I didn't want to say it, she whispered. I crossed the kitchen and pulled her into my arms. I know, he said it would help. I held her tighter. No, baby. That wasn't helping. That was using you. And there it was. The line I had avoided saying out loud. Todd was using our child. Whatever part of me still wanted to protect the memory of who he used to be finally stepped back. Not disappeared. Memories don't obey orders like that. But stepped back. I kissed the top of Emma's head and let her go. Then I picked up my phone and called Denise. When she answered, I said no more soft approach. Denise was quiet for half a second. Then she said good. I looked at Todd's old aquarium photo one more time. Then I deleted it. The final hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in late October. Cold enough for coats, not cold enough for snow. I remember that because I stood outside the Baltimore County Circuit Court, holding a paper cup of coffee so hot it burned my fingertips through the cardboard sleeve, watching people hurry past with scarves wrapped around their faces, while my stomach folded in on itself. You'd think after 22 years around military operations I'd be calmer under pressure. That's not how it works. It's easier to stay steady when the danger is abstract. Systems, threat assessments, data breaches. Family court is personal. Family court knows your weak spots. Denise met me on the courthouse steps carrying 2 legal folders and wearing the same expression she wore before difficult hearings, mildly irritated on purpose. You eat anything, she asked. Half a banana. That's depressing. It's also true. She handed me a granola bar from her purse. Eat. I obeyed because Denise had somehow become the closest thing I had to a commanding officer outside the army. Inside the courthouse smelled like wet wool and old paper. The security line moved slowly. Somewhere nearby a toddler cried while his exhausted father bounced him on one hip. Real life. Ordinary heartbreaks stacked on top of each other under fluorescent lighting. Todd was already there when we entered the courtroom. Of course he was. He stood near his attorney wearing a navy suit, polished shoes, and an American flag pin so shiny it practically winked at people. I almost laughed when I saw it. Almost, because then I noticed Emma sitting beside the court-appointed guardian ad litem near the front row looking pale and nervous. That tightened something in my chest immediately. Todd saw me and straightened. For a split second I caught a glimpse of the old version of him. the polished confidence, the smile that used to calm rooms. Then I noticed how tired he looked around the eyes. Good suits can only hide so much. Cheryl was nowhere in sight. Interesting. Morning, Todd said carefully as I approached. I nodded once. Denise didn't even pretend to acknowledge him. We took our seats. The hearing started 10 minutes later. Family court is strange because life-changing moments happen in rooms that look like community college classrooms. Beige walls, cheap microphones, water stains on ceiling tiles. And somehow your entire future gets discussed between people coughing into their sleeves. The judge that morning was Judge Holloway, a woman probably in her early 60s with silver hair cut short, and the energy of somebody who had absolutely no patience left for performance. That worried Todd immediately. I could tell. His confidence worked best on people who wanted to be charmed. Judge Holloway looked like she wanted everyone to stop wasting her morning. Todd's attorney opened first. He spoke smoothly about consistency, parental availability, and emotional structure. He mentioned my absence during the previous hearing within the first 5 minutes. Of course he did. Mrs. Grant's unexplained failure to appear, he called it. Unexplained. Like I'd skipped court to go shopping at Target. Denise remained calm beside me, writing notes in blue ink. Then came my turn. I testified about my work schedule, Emma's routine school coordination, transportation, all the ordinary details mothers carry around in invisible lists inside their heads. What size basketball shoes your daughter wears. Which mornings she hates scrambled eggs. How she gets quiet when she's anxious. The shape of a child's life lives mostly in tiny details nobody applauds. Todd's attorney stood for cross-examination. And there it was. The smile. Not cruel exactly, worse. Confident. Mrs. Grant, he said you claim your absence from the previous hearing was related to a classified military matter. Yes. And yet you've provided very little documentation supporting that. Because there are legal restrictions regarding operational details. Convenient. Denise objected immediately. Sustained Judge Holloway said sharply. Still, the point landed the way he wanted. Todd leaned back slightly in his chair. He thought this was going well. Then Denise stood. Your Honor, she said calmly before continuing further, I'd like to submit supplemental documentation received yesterday evening. Todd's attorney frowned. Judge Holloway accepted the folder from the clerk. The courtroom got very quiet. I watched the judge's eyes move steadily across the pages, then stop, then move backward. Her expression changed almost immediately. Not dramatic, just colder. She looked up over her glasses. Mr. Wallace, she said to Todd's attorney, were you aware there was an ongoing Defense Department review connected to your client's attempts to obtain protected personnel information? Todd's attorney blinked. What? Oh, that was satisfying. Not explosive, satisfying. Better. Controlled. Judge Holloway continued reading. The court has received confirmation that Mrs. Grant's absence was connected to protected federal duties covered under applicable service member protections. Todd shifted beside his lawyer. Hard. Judge Holloway looked directly at him now. Additionally, she continued, there appears to be documentation regarding unauthorized investigative efforts initiated by Mr. Grant. The room stayed silent enough to hear paper moving. Todd's attorney looked stunned, which meant Todd had not fully informed his own lawyer. Classic Todd. Even now he thought he could manage the narrative privately and reveal only the parts that benefited him. Judge Holloway closed the folder carefully. Mr. Grant, she said, family court is not the place to litigate classified personnel matters through intimidation or improper access attempts. Todd opened his mouth. Closed it again. For the first time since our divorce started, he truly looked embarrassed. Not angry, embarrassed. And strangely enough, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt relieved, like somebody had finally turned the lights on after months of sitting in a distorted version of reality. Then came the moment I still think about sometimes late at night. The guardian ad litem leaned toward the judge. Quiet conversation. A nod. Then Judge Holloway looked toward Emma. Emma, she said gently, I understand you wish to make a statement. Every muscle in my body tightened. Emma stood slowly. She looked so young suddenly. 15, oversized cardigan, nervous hands. Todd immediately looked alarmed. Your Honor. Judge Holloway silenced him with one glance. Emma swallowed hard before speaking. My mom misses things sometimes, she said softly. But she always comes back. Nobody moved. She works a lot, I know that, but when something's wrong, she shows up. Todd stared straight ahead now. Emma's voice trembled slightly. My dad keeps saying my mom chooses work over us. She paused. But honestly, I think my mom disappears when people need protecting. The courtroom stayed perfectly still. Then came the line that broke something open. My dad disappears when things get hard. Todd shut his eyes. Just for a second. But I saw it. And so did everybody else. Emma sat back down quickly after that, looking like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. I wanted to run over and hold her. Instead, I stayed still because sometimes strength is staying seated when your whole body wants to rescue somebody. Judge Holloway took off her glasses slowly. Then she began speaking. Primary custody adjustments. Revised financial disclosures. Mandatory correction of incomplete income reporting. Additional review of concealed compensation. Todd's face lost color sentence by sentence. By the time the hearing ended, he looked 20 years older. People began filing out quietly. No dramatic music, no applause, no cinematic ending. Just paperwork, exhaustion, the scrape of chairs against the floor. Todd stood near the aisle while people passed around him. For one strange second, I remembered the young man who once held my hand through the harbor tunnel after the aquarium. Then the memory passed. He finally looked at me. Not angry, not smug, just tired. Like somebody who had spent too long trying to win something ugly. I walked past him without speaking, and this time he was the one who couldn't meet my eyes. 6 months later, Emma and I were standing in the frozen food aisle at the Costco in Columbia arguing about chicken nuggets. Not important chicken nuggets either, not the kind that changes a life. Just a giant orange bag of breaded chicken pieces with a cartoon farm on the front. I'm telling you, Emma said, leaning on the cart handle, these taste better in the air fryer. You say that about everything. Because everything tastes better in the air fryer. You said that about broccoli. And I was right. I looked at her, then looked at the bag, then tossed it into the cart. She smiled like she had just won a Supreme Court case. That was what peace looked like for us. Not big declarations. Not a perfect house or a healed heart wrapped in a bow. Just a Saturday morning with a wobbly cart, a daughter who teased me again, and enough room in my chest to laugh without checking who might use it against me later. We had moved into a townhouse off Snowden River Parkway 2 months after the hearing. Nothing fancy. Beige siding, small kitchen parking spots that filled up too fast if you came home after 6. But the windows got good afternoon light, and Emma liked that her room faced a maple tree instead of the neighbor's trash cans. The first night there, we ate pizza on the living room floor because the table hadn't arrived yet. Emma spilled garlic sauce on a cardboard box labeled bathroom stuff, and for some reason we laughed so hard we both ended up crying a little. That happens sometimes. Grief sneaks into ordinary moments, so does healing. Todd did not disappear from our lives. That would have been too simple, and life rarely gives women clean endings. He still had visitation. He still texted. He still tried to sound wounded when boundaries inconvenienced him. At first, every message from him made my stomach clench. Melissa, can we talk like adults? Melissa, this isn't healthy for Emma. Melissa, I hope one day you'll realize I was scared too. The old me would have answered quickly, explained, softened, managed his feelings so the room stayed calm. The new me took time. Sometimes I waited hours, sometimes a full day. Sometimes Denise helped me turn 3 emotional paragraphs into 1 sentence. Please send schedule questions through the parenting app. That sentence became my favorite piece of literature. Todd hated the parenting app, which made me trust it even more. After the hearing, the Defense Department review did what government reviews do. It moved slowly, asked boring questions, collected statements, and generated paperwork with long subject lines. Todd wasn't dragged away in handcuffs. His accounting firm didn't collapse overnight. Nobody from a movie studio showed up to film his downfall. But consequences arrived in quieter ways. One client left after hearing there had been a federal inquiry connected to improper record access. Then another. His firm partners stopped letting him handle certain sensitive accounts. Cheryl moved out before Thanksgiving and posted a picture of herself hiking in Sedona with a caption about choosing peace over chaos. Dana sent me the screenshot. I stared at it for 10 seconds and said, "Good for Sedona." Dana laughed so hard she almost choked on her coffee. Todd eventually sold the Arlington condo he loved bragging about and moved into an apartment near Rockville Pike. Not a bad place, just smaller, less impressive. The kind of apartment complex where the lobby smells like floor polish and somebody's dog is always barking behind a door. Emma came home from one weekend there and said Dad bought a fake plant. That's allowed. He named it Winston. I looked up from folding towels. He named the plant. Yeah. I pressed my lips together. Emma did too. Then we both lost it. I know that sounds mean, maybe it was a little. But there are moments after betrayal when laughter is not cruelty, it's oxygen. My promotion came through in January. I found out while sitting in my car outside a Dunkin' on Route 175, eating a breakfast sandwich that had gone cold, because I was reading the email twice to make sure I understood it. For a minute I just sat there. 22 years of work, missed holidays, bad coffee, locked rooms, mornings when my knees hurt before my boots were even tied. Stress weight I still carried around my middle, no matter how many times I downloaded the same fitness app and lied to it about starting Monday. And there it was. Promotion confirmed. I didn't cheer. I called Emma. She answered breathless from school hallway noise. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," I said. "I got it." There was a pause. Then she screamed so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. That night she made a banner out of printer paper and Scotch tape. "Congrats, Mom." The letters were crooked. One G was backwards. I kept it taped to the refrigerator for 3 months. Todd sent flowers the next day. White lilies. No card except his name printed on the florist slip. I stood there holding them in the doorway, not angry, exactly. More tired by the predictability of it. Years ago, lilies had been my favorite. He remembered that. What he had forgotten was that I stopped liking them after his mother's funeral, when the entire church smelled so heavily of lilies that I couldn't breathe without feeling like grief had a scent. I set the flowers on the counter. Emma came downstairs, saw them, and wrinkled her nose. "Those are intense." "Your dad sent them." "Oh." She looked at me carefully. "You okay?" I nodded. Then I picked up the vase, carried it outside, and gave the flowers to Mrs. Alvarez next door, who loved anything free and dramatic. She opened her door in slippers and said, "Ay, beautiful." "Who died?" "An old habit," I said. She didn't understand, but she hugged me anyway. That spring, Emma joined track. I made it to every meet except one, and the one I missed, I told her ahead of time, apologized once, and did not let Todd turn it into a courtroom exhibit. When she ran, she looked awkward and determined, and exactly like herself. I sat in bleachers with other parents, wrapped in a blanket, cheering like an embarrassing woman who had earned the right. Sometimes I caught myself scanning the crowd for Todd. Sometimes he came. Sometimes he didn't. When he did, we were polite in the stiff way divorced people are polite when a child is nearby. But he no longer controlled the temperature of the room. That was new too. One evening in May, Todd sent a long message. Not through the parenting app. Directly to my phone. I almost deleted it without reading, but curiosity got me. "Melissa, I've been thinking about everything. I know I went too far. I was angry and scared, and I took it out on you. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know I'm sorry for what I put you and Emma through." I read it twice. Then I set the phone down and made tea. That may sound small, but for me it was enormous. There had been a time when Todd's regret would have pulled me across the room like a leash. This time I let the kettle boil. I let the tea steep. I sat at the kitchen table and watched the evening light move across the floor. Then I wrote back. "I hope you mean that. Please keep future communication on the parenting app unless it's an emergency." I stared at the message for a moment before sending it. No lecture, no punishment, no opening for him to step through. Just a boundary. My thumb shook a little when I hit send. Healing does not always feel peaceful while you're doing it. Sometimes it feels rude, cold, unnatural, especially if you spent years believing love meant immediate access to every part of you. But after I sent that message, I slept better than I had in months. A few weeks later, Emma and I drove out to Sandy Point State Park on a windy Sunday. The Bay Bridge stretched across the water in the distance, pale and steady under a washed blue sky. We sat on a blanket eating sandwiches from Wawa, and Emma told me about a boy named Caleb who was not her boyfriend, obviously, which meant he absolutely was. I listened, really listened. No phone in my hand, no apology waiting in my throat, no part of me bracing for Todd's judgment. Just my daughter's voice, the gulls yelling over the water and mustard on my sleeve. At one point, Emma leaned against my shoulder. "You seem different now," she said. "Different how?" She thought about it. "Like you don't keep asking permission in your head." I looked out at the water for a long time. That kid always did know how to walk straight into the center of things. "I think I got tired," I said. She nodded. "Good." I laughed. "Good. Yeah, you were tired in the wrong direction before." I had no idea what that meant exactly, but I understood it anyway. For years I had worn myself down trying to be believed by someone committed to misunderstanding me. I thought if I explained better, loved harder, stayed calmer, forgave faster, Todd would finally see me clearly. But some people don't misunderstand you by accident. Some people need you small so they can feel large. The sweetest revenge was not watching Todd lose his shine. It was not the courtroom or the inquiry or the moment his own confidence finally turned against him. It was this. A quiet life where my daughter knew the truth. A locked door when I needed one. A phone I did not have to answer right away. A body I stopped hating for surviving stress the best way it could. A middle-aged woman standing in her own kitchen eating air-fried chicken nuggets at 9 p.m., laughing with her child, no longer begging anyone to admit she mattered. I mattered. That was enough. If you've ever spent years trying to prove your worth to someone who had already decided not to see it, I hope you find your way back to yourself. Not all at once, just one honest boundary at a time. And when peace finally comes, let it stay. Back in 2019, I was deployed outside Kandahar when my husband called and told me our daughter was dead. I remember the wind first. That sounds strange, I know, but that's what stayed with me. Not his voice. Not even the words at first. Just that dry Afghan wind pushing sand against the side of the building while I stood outside a logistics office with my phone pressed so hard to my ear, my fingers went numb. Daniel was crying. At least I thought he was crying. "Rachel," he said, and his voice kept breaking. "It's Emily. She's gone." I actually looked around like maybe somebody nearby had misunderstood something, and I was hearing the wrong conversation. That's how your mind protects you for about 3 seconds before the truth walks in and takes a chair. "What do you mean, gone?" I asked him. "She got sick fast. The flu turned into pneumonia. The doctors couldn't stop it. My daughter was 8 years old. 8. She had a gap between her front teeth, a purple backpack from Walmart, and a habit of sorting M&Ms by color before she ate them. She still slept with a stuffed rabbit named Captain Bun because I once joked he outranked everybody in the house. I said, "Put the doctor on the phone." Daniel went quiet. That silence was my first warning, but I was too far away and too scared to know what to do with it. "She's already been moved," he said. "Everything happened so fast." I don't remember hanging up. I remember my commander's face when I told him. I remember somebody putting a paper cup of coffee in my hand and me not drinking it. I remember arguing with people who were trying to help me because emergency leave was not instant magic no matter what civilians think. There were forms, approvals, transport schedules, weather delays, and a whole chain of people saying, "Captain Mercer, we're doing everything we can." I wanted to scream at all of them. Instead, I stood there like a good soldier and gave them the information they needed. Name Captain Rachel Mercer. Home of record Knoxville, Tennessee. Dependent child Emily Grace Mercer. Status deceased. That word looked obscene on paper. By the time I got back to Tennessee, the funeral was already over. Daniel picked me up at McGee Tyson Airport in the same gray Ford F-150 he'd been driving for 6 years. He looked thinner. His beard was messy. His eyes were red around the edges. For one small second, when I saw him standing by baggage claim, I forgot all the bad years between us. The unpaid bills, the cold dinners, the way he made me feel guilty every time I deployed like I was choosing the army just to spite him. He opened his arms. I walked into them because I didn't know what else to do. "I'm sorry," he whispered into my hair. "I'm so sorry." "Where is she?" I asked. He pulled back. "Rachel, where is my daughter?" He looked at the floor. "At Maple Ridge Cemetery. My parents bought a plot near the old oak section." I stared at him. "You buried her before I got home." His jaw tightened like I had wounded him by asking. "The doctors said we shouldn't wait. They said the illness had affected her body." The funeral director agreed. "I didn't want you to see her like that." He said it softly, like mercy. I heard it like theft. But I had been awake for almost 2 days. My knees were swollen from travel, my back hurt, and my brain felt packed with wet cotton. I had crossed half the world to get to my child, and he was telling me there was nothing left to reach. So I didn't fight the way people think mothers fight in stories. I folded. Daniel drove me home through Alcoa, past gas stations and strip malls, and a church sign that said, "God is close to the brokenhearted." I remember hating that sign with a clean, sharp hate. When we pulled into our driveway, I sat there for a minute before I could open the truck door. Emily's bicycle was gone from the porch. Inside the house smelled like lemon cleaner. Not home, cleaner. Like somebody had tried to scrub grief off the walls before I arrived. I went straight to Emily's room. Her bed was made. 2 made. The sheets tucked tight stuffed animals arranged like a display. Her little desk was cleared except for a cup of colored pencils. Half her closet was empty. "Where are her clothes?" I asked. Daniel stood in the doorway, not coming in. My mom helped pack some things. We thought it might be easier. Easier for who? He rubbed his face. Please don't do this right now. I picked up Captain Bunn from the pillow. His left ear was still stitched crooked where Emily had tried to fix him herself with purple thread. That was when I finally cried. Not the pretty kind. Not the movie kind. I made a sound I had never made before, and Daniel stepped toward me like he wanted to touch my shoulder. I told him not to. 2 weeks later, I filed for divorce. People thought it was grief. Some said I was making a mistake. A woman from church told me pain makes us push away the people we need most. I wanted to ask her if pain also made husbands sleep with dental hygienists named Trina while their wives were overseas, because that's how I found out. A receipt in Daniel's jacket pocket from a hotel off Cedar Bluff Road. 2 wine glasses charged to the room. His phone lighting up on the kitchen counter with a message that said, "Miss you already." I didn't scream, I didn't throw plates, I was too tired for theater. I put the receipt on the table and said, "I'll have my lawyer call you." Daniel cried again. By then, I trusted his tears about as much as I trusted a gas station sushi roll. The next year was strange. I moved into a small rental duplex near Fountain City because I couldn't stand the house. I stopped wearing my uniform unless I had to. My body changed after that deployment and after the grief. I gained weight around my middle. My right knee clicked every time I climbed stairs. Sleep came in pieces. Some nights I woke up reaching for a child who wasn't there. Every Sunday when I could, I drove to Maple Ridge Cemetery. I brought flowers from Kroger because the florist downtown was too cheerful and too expensive. I sat on a little folding stool beside Emily's grave and talked to the headstone like it could pass messages along. I told her about the weather, about the neighbor's dog, about how I still couldn't make pancakes without burning the first one. I told her I was sorry more times than any person should say anything. One afternoon in late October, I was sitting there with a photo in my hand. It was my favorite one. Emily wearing my patrol cap sideways, grinning like she had just conquered the United States Army. I heard leaves crunch behind me. I turned and saw a skinny little boy standing near the oak tree. Maybe 8, maybe 9. Brown hair sticking up in the back. Jeans too short at the ankles. He was staring at the picture. "You need something, sweetheart?" I asked. He shook his head, but he didn't leave. I was too worn down to be gentle. "Then why are you watching me?" He swallowed. His eyes went from the headstone to the photo and back again. Then he said so quietly I almost missed it, "Ma'am. That girl in your picture isn't dead." My hand went loose. The photo slipped from my fingers and landed face up in the grass. I stood so fast my bad knee sparked pain up my leg. "What did you say?" The boy took one step back, but he didn't run. He pointed at the picture. "That girl," he said. "She lives near my grandma's trailer." For a second, I thought I might grab that little boy by the shoulders and shake answers out of him. I didn't, but I wanted to. There's a kind of fear that comes out looking like anger, and mine had teeth on it. "What's your name?" I asked. He looked toward the cemetery road like he was considering running. "Caleb." "Caleb what?" "Caleb Brooks." I bent down and picked up the photo with hands that didn't feel like mine anymore. Emily's smile looked back at me from the glossy paper crooked cap and all. I held it out toward him. "Look at her again." He did. His face was serious in that way some kids get when life has made them older than they should be. "That's Emma," he said. "No," my voice came out too sharp. "Her name is Emily." Caleb flinched a little and guilt hit me right behind the ribs. He was just a child. He hadn't made the grave. He hadn't buried the coffin. He hadn't called me overseas and torn my life in half. I took a breath. "Sorry," I said. "I'm not mad at you." He nodded, but he didn't look convinced. I pointed at the headstone. "That is my daughter's name, Emily Grace Mercer. My husband told me she died last year. So if you know something, Caleb, I need you to tell me exactly what you mean." He looked at the stone again, then back at the picture. "My grandma says not to get in grown folks' business," he said. "Your grandma sounds smart." "She is." "Then take me to her." That made him nervous. I could see it in the way he shifted his feet, one sneaker grinding into the damp grass. He wore a thin hoodie even though the air had turned chilly and the cuffs were stretched out like they'd been pulled over his hands too many times. "I don't know," he said. "She don't like surprise visitors. She'll like me less if I sit here guessing." That almost made him smile. Almost. He studied me for a few seconds. Maybe he saw the uniform habits I couldn't shake. The stiff posture, the direct eye contact. Maybe he just saw a tired woman standing beside a child's grave holding a picture like it was the last board in a flood. Finally, he said, "It's not far. But you gotta drive slow. The roads got potholes bad enough to swallow a tire. I followed him in my Jeep out of Maple Ridge Cemetery and down a 2-lane road lined with bare trees and old farm fences. He rode his bike ahead of me at first, then got tired and loaded it into the back. I should have been worried about how strange it looked, a grown woman leaving a cemetery with some boy she'd just met. But grief makes rules feel far away. Caleb sat in the passenger seat with his hands folded tight in his lap, giving directions like a little old man. Turn after the Baptist church. Not this one. The next one with the sign that's missing the T. We passed a Dollar General, a closed-down auto parts store, and a barbecue place with smoke rolling out back. East Tennessee in late October has a way of looking worn and beautiful at the same time. Brown hills, red leaves, old pickup trucks, porches full of things people meant to fix. The trailer park sat outside Oak Ridge, tucked behind a gravel road that looked like the county forgot it owned. There were rusted mailboxes at the entrance, a few plastic Halloween pumpkins on steps, and one sad inflatable ghost collapsed in somebody's yard like it had given up. Caleb pointed to a beige single-wide with blue shutters. That's Grandma's. A woman stood on the porch before I even shut off the engine. She was small but solid, wrapped in a faded University of Tennessee sweatshirt, gray hair pinned up any kind of way. One hand rested on a cane, but her eyes were strong enough to make the cane feel decorative. Caleb, she called you better have a real good reason for bringing the army to my door. He looked at me. She's not the army, she's Rachel. I stepped out slowly, hands visible like I was approaching a checkpoint instead of a porch. Ma'am, I said, Rachel Mercer. Wanda Brooks, she said, and I know who you are. The world tilted a little. I held up the photo. Then you know why I'm here. Wanda looked at it, and something in her face changed. Not surprise. More like the face of someone who'd been waiting for a storm and finally saw the clouds arrive. She opened the screen door. Come in before the whole park starts watching. Folks around here can smell trouble like bacon. Inside smelled like coffee Vicks Vapo Rub and fried onions. The living room was small, clean, and crowded with life. Crocheted blankets, school papers on the coffee table, a stack of library books, a TV playing a judge show with the volume low. Wanda moved slowly, her hips stiff. I noticed the swelling in her knuckles when she reached for the back of a chair. Arthritis, she said, catching me looking. Don't get old unless you've got a sense of humor and a good heating pad. I sat because my legs were starting to feel unreliable. Caleb stood by the hallway watching both of us. Wanda lowered herself into a recliner with a tired sigh. The girl calls herself Emma. She's Emily, I said. I figured that out. How? Wanda nodded toward the hallway. Kids talk in their sleep when they're scared. She said Mommy and Rachel more than once. She said Fort Campbell too. I didn't know what all of it meant. My throat tightened. Where is she? At school right now. Bus'll be here in about 20 minutes. I almost stood. Wanda lifted one finger. Sit down. I stared at her. She didn't blink. You may outrank me somewhere else, she said, but not in my living room. Under different circumstances, I might have laughed, maybe even liked her right away. But my skin felt too tight for humor. She leaned forward, both hands on her cane. Nearly a year ago, Caleb and I found a little girl behind Ruthie's diner after closing. January cold, no coat worth naming, fever so bad she was shaking. She said some church people had taken her someplace and she ran. She was scared of cars, men, offices, phones, just about everything. I whispered, "Why didn't you call the police?" I did. That stopped me. Wanda's mouth tightened. Deputy came. Child gave a false name because she'd been told her mother didn't want her, and her father was the only one handling things. Paperwork got confusing. Then the church program claimed she was in their care. I didn't trust the smell of it, so you kept her. I kept her alive. Her voice didn't rise, but the words landed hard. There's a difference. I looked down at my hands. My fingernails had dug little half-moons into my palms. Before I could answer, a school bus squealed outside. Caleb ran to the window. "She's here," he said. Everything inside me went quiet. A few seconds later, the front door opened. Small footsteps. A backpack dropped with a soft thump. Then she appeared in the doorway. My daughter. Thinner, longer hair, a face that had learned caution. But my daughter. She held a worksheet in one hand and a little paper bag in the other. Her eyes moved from Wanda to Caleb, then to me. She froze. I couldn't breathe. "Emily," I said. Her bottom lip trembled, but she didn't come closer. Behind her left ear, just above the curve of her jaw, was the tiny brown birthmark I used to kiss when she was a baby. She looked at me like I was a dream she didn't trust. "Mommy," she whispered. I took one step forward and stopped because she stepped back. That hurt worse than I can explain. I crouched right there in Wanda Brooks' living room, my bad knee protesting my heart beating so hard I felt it in my teeth. "Baby, I didn't leave you," I said. "I thought you were gone." Emily's eyes filled, but she held herself stiff as a board. "They said you picked the army," she said. "They said you didn't want me anymore because I was too much trouble." "No," I said, and my voice cracked. "No, baby." She looked at Wanda, then back at me, and then she asked the question that still wakes me up some nights. "Mommy, why did you leave me with the church people?" I reached for her slow, giving her time to refuse me. She let me touch her hand, but she didn't hug me back. I stayed at Wanda Brooks's kitchen table until after midnight. Not because anybody asked me to, because I couldn't make myself leave. Emily had gone to bed in the small back room Wanda had fixed up for her. Pink blanket, thrift store lamp, a little plastic dresser with one drawer that didn't close right. Caleb had given her the top bunk, even though he complained about it like an old man being taxed by the government. "She kicks in her sleep," he told me, standing in the hallway with a toothbrush in his mouth. Wanda said, "Boy, go brush," instead of narrating. That was the first time I almost smiled. Almost. I sat at the table with a mug of coffee I didn't drink, listening to Wanda tell me what she knew. Some of it came in pieces. Some of it she only understood later. Emily had been brought to a church-linked children's program called New Harbor Family Outreach, about 40 minutes outside Knoxville. On paper, it claimed to help troubled minors from unstable homes. That phrase made my stomach twist. Unstable home. My daughter had a mother in the United States Army, and a bedroom with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. She had a dentist appointment scheduled for March, and a library card with overdue Junie B. Jones books. But somebody had written unstable home on a form, and a room full of adults had accepted it because the paperwork looked official. Wanda slid a folder across the table. "I kept copies of everything I could," she said. I opened it carefully. Clinic receipts, school enrollment papers under the name Emma Miller, a note from a deputy who had come by once and never followed up, a crumpled flyer from New Harbor with smiling children on the front and a Bible verse printed in blue ink. "You kept all this?" Wanda shrugged. "I was a waitress for 43 years. You learn to save receipts when men start talking too smooth." That time I did smile, just a little. But it faded when I saw the intake date on the flyer. January 18th. Emily's supposed funeral had been January 15th. 3 days. Daniel had buried an empty story and moved our child into a program before I even made it back across the ocean. I went cold all over. Wanda saw it. "You need somebody who knows how to dig without making noise." "I know someone," I said. The next morning I called Marcus Vega. Marcus and I had served together at Fort Campbell years earlier. Back then he was Army CID, the kind of man who noticed everything and smiled at almost nothing. He retired with a bad shoulder, a ruined marriage, and the moral patience of a man who had spent too many years watching people lie badly. He answered on the third ring. "Mercer," he said, "this better not be a butt dial." "Marcus," I said, "I found Emily." There was no joke after that, only silence. Then he said, "Start from the beginning, slow." So I did. I told him about the phone call in Afghanistan, the funeral I never saw, the grave, Caleb, Wanda. Emily standing in that trailer doorway looking at me like love was a trick. Marcus didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he let out a long breath. "Do not confront Daniel," he said. "I wasn't planning to." "You were absolutely planning to." I hated that he knew me. "I want to go over there and put his face through his own front door. I'm sure that would feel meaningful for about 15 seconds, Marcus said. Then he'd call you unstable, angry, traumatized from deployment, and half the town would believe him because people love an easy label. I closed my eyes. He was right. That was the worst part. What do I do? You document, you breathe, you keep your daughter safe, and you let me make some calls. Marcus drove down from Kentucky the next day in an old black Chevy Tahoe with a cracked windshield and a gas station coffee in each cup holder. He hugged me once hard and quick, then got straight to work at Wanda's kitchen table. For 3 days we built a timeline. Not a dramatic one, a real one. The kind made of boring things that ruin criminals. Dates, signatures, receipts, phone records, county filings, hospital gaps. The first problem was the hospital. Daniel had told me Emily died at Park Ridge Children's after complications from the flu. but Marcus had an old contact who confirmed something careful and unofficial. Emily Mercer had no full admission record there for that week. There was an urgent care visit listed under her name, but no ICU transfer, no death record, no attending physician assigned to a deceased child. That doesn't happen by accident, Marcus said. Then came the funeral home. Holloway & Sons Funeral Services had handled the burial. Closed casket, private service. Daniel signed nearly everything. The death certificate listed a doctor whose signature looked wrong even to me, and I was not a handwriting expert. Marcus tapped the copy with one thick finger. See this? Too clean. Real doctors sign like they're escaping a fire. Wanda snorted from the stove. That's the truth. My doctor signs like a chicken fell in ink. I needed the laugh. It passed through the room and left us breathing again. But the deeper we dug, the worse it got. My father had left a small trust for Emily before he died. Nothing huge by rich people standards, but enough to matter to a man with gambling debt. There was also a piece of land outside Maryville, 12 acres my father always called someday money. Emily was named as beneficiary after me. While I was deployed, Daniel had used an old power of attorney form I'd signed years earlier for household emergencies. He stretched it, twisted it, and paired it with false documents claiming Emily had died, and that I was emotionally unfit to manage affairs from overseas. Marcus found one petition filed in county court. Mother unavailable due to military deployment. Another line said, Mother voluntarily relinquished contact. I read that sentence 5 times. Then I stood up, walked outside Wanda's trailer, and threw up behind a rusted lawn chair. When I came back in, Marcus didn't offer comfort. He knew better. He just handed me a paper towel and said, Now you understand what we're dealing with. I wiped my mouth. He told her I gave her up. Yes. He put that on paper. Yes. And people believed it. Marcus looked tired. People believe paper faster than women, especially tired women, especially angry ones. That landed hard because I had spent my whole adult life proving I could be calm, competent, and useful in rooms full of men who thought volume was leadership. Now my own husband had used that same discipline against me. If I acted too quiet, I was cold. If I acted too furious, I was unstable. If I cried, I was broken. If I didn't, I was heartless. Marcus saw my face and leaned forward. Rachel, listen to me. You're a soldier. Act like one. Don't fire until you know where the target is. That became the rule. We kept digging. New Harbor Family Outreach had taken Emily under a false identity. Their records described her as withdrawn, defiant, and abandoned by maternal parent. There were other children listed in similar language. A boy from Clarksville, 2 sisters from Chattanooga, all from families dealing with divorce, deployment, or custody fights. Not trafficking, I don't use that word lightly, but it was a dirty pipeline, a quiet one, the kind that hides behind charity dinners and polished church bulletins. That night after Emily fell asleep, I sat beside her bed. She had one hand tucked under her cheek. Her face looked younger in sleep, almost like before. I wanted to promise her everything would be fixed. But grown people had already hurt her with promises, so I whispered something smaller. I'm here. Then my phone buzzed. Marcus had sent one scanned document. Daniel's signature sat at the bottom. Above it, in neat black type, was the line I knew I would never forget. Mother voluntarily relinquished contact. I stared at those words until they blurred. Then I saved the file in 3 different places. The first time I sat across from Daniel after finding Emily, I nearly ruined everything. That's the truth. People love revenge stories where the hero stays cool and says clever things while dramatic music plays somewhere in the background. Real life is mostly trying not to throw mashed potatoes at somebody in a Cracker Barrel. Daniel called me 3 days after Marcus uncovered the trust paperwork. I was standing in Wanda's kitchen making boxed macaroni for Emily and Caleb when my phone lit up with his name. Just seeing it made my shoulders tighten. Wanda glanced over from the recliner. That him? Yeah. You gonna answer? I looked down the hallway toward Emily's room. She was doing homework at the little folding table Wanda kept by the window, tongue sticking out slightly while she wrote. Same way she used to when spelling got difficult. I have to, I said. Wanda nodded once. Then remember who he is before he starts acting like who he pretends to be. I stepped outside onto the porch before answering. Rachel, Daniel said softly. God, he sounded tired. Not guilty, tired. There's a difference. Hey, I said. You okay? That almost made me laugh. No, I told him, not really. He sighed into the phone like we were still a team carrying the same grief. "I've been thinking about you," he said. I leaned against the porch railing. Across the trailer park, somebody was grilling burgers. Country music drifted from a nearby truck radio. "What do you want, Daniel?" A pause. Then carefully, "I hate how things ended between us." There it was. Not Emily. Not our daughter. Us. Marcus had warned me Daniel would eventually circle back once he thought enough time had passed, especially if he suspected money was involved. People like Daniel always thought they were smarter than consequences. "I've been thinking too," I said. That perked him up immediately. I was hoping maybe we could talk. I looked through the screen door. Emily was laughing quietly at something Caleb said. Every instinct in my body wanted to tell Daniel exactly where she was. Instead, I said maybe. That word bought us dinner at Cracker Barrel 2 nights later, the one off Interstate 40 near Farragut. I got there early because I needed time to settle myself. My stomach had been bad all day. Too much coffee, not enough sleep, too much rage packed into one human body. The hostess sat me near the fireplace. Around me were older couples eating chicken and dumplings, tourists buying candy by the register, a little girl begging her grandfather for a stuffed bear. Normal life. That was the strange thing about betrayal. The world kept ordering sweet tea while your own life turned radioactive. Daniel arrived wearing a navy quarter-zip sweater I bought him years ago from Bass Pro Shops. Seeing him in it nearly knocked the air out of me. He slid into the seat across from me slowly like he was approaching a wounded animal. "You look tired," he said. I almost replied, "So does a graveyard," but I held it in. Instead, I shrugged. "It's been a rough year." His eyes softened in a way that would have fooled me once. "I know." "No, you don't," I thought. The waitress came over with menus. Daniel ordered meatloaf and sweet tea, same thing he always ordered. I got coffee because my stomach already hated me enough. For a few minutes we talked like divorced people, pretending not to remember why they divorced. Work, weather, traffic on Kingston Pike. Finally, Daniel rubbed his hands together and said, "I miss her every day." I stared at him. Right there, that moment. That was when I realized something important. Daniel believed his own performance. Maybe not completely, maybe not deep down where rotten things live, but enough to survive inside it. Enough to sit under fake antique signs in a Cracker Barrel and talk about my daughter like she was dead while she colored pictures 40 minutes away. "You ever think about moving back into the house?" he asked. I blinked. "What? The duplex can't be easy. You shouldn't be alone right now." There was concern in his voice. Manufactured, measured, like a salesman leaning into a warranty pitch. "I'm managing." He nodded slowly. "I know the divorce got ugly." Ugly. That word did something to me. Not the affair, not the fake paperwork, ugly. I suddenly saw every version of my life with him all at once. Every deployment where he made me feel guilty for leaving. Every promotion he quietly resented. Every time I apologized for succeeding because it made him uncomfortable. I felt heat rise behind my eyes. Daniel kept talking. "I just think grief made us both act out." Act out! Like I keyed his truck instead of burying my child. I stood up so fast my chair scraped the floor. Daniel startled. "Rachel, I need the restroom." I walked away before my temper outran my brain. Inside the bathroom, I locked myself in a stall and threw up hard enough my ribs hurt. Afterward, I sat there breathing through my nose, staring at the beige tile wall. 42 years old. 2 deployments. Bad knee. 20 pounds heavier than I used to be. And hiding in a Cracker Barrel bathroom, trying not to commit a felony over biscuits and gravy. I started laughing. Not happy laughter. The kind people do right before they either heal or lose their minds completely. When I finally looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. My face looked older than it had a year earlier. There were deep lines around my mouth now. My hair was pulled back too tight. I looked like somebody who had survived something ugly. Good. Survival was useful. I washed my hands, fixed my expression, and went back out there. Daniel smiled carefully when I sat down. "You okay?" "No," I said honestly, "but I'm trying." That seemed to relax him. People love honesty when they think it benefits them. Dinner came. We picked at food neither of us wanted. Then Daniel started talking too much. That happens when liars think they're winning. He mentioned legal bills. He mentioned Trina's mistakes. Then he made the mistake Marcus had hoped for. He leaned back and sighed. Emily would have forgotten most of this eventually anyway. The world narrowed. I kept my voice calm. "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "Kids move on. They adapt." There it was. Not grief. Not regret. Management. He was talking about my daughter like an inconvenience that had almost become manageable. Under the table, my phone recorded every word. Daniel took another sip of tea. "I know you probably hate me," he said, "but I did what I thought was best at the time." I looked him directly in the eyes. "For who?" For 1 second, something cold moved behind his face. Then it disappeared. That scared me more than yelling would have. When dinner ended, Daniel insisted on paying. Out in the parking lot, the Tennessee air had turned cold enough to bite. He stood beside my Jeep with his hands in his pockets. "I miss you sometimes," he said quietly. I looked at him. The man who buried paperwork. The man who signed forms while our daughter cried for me somewhere else. And I realized something that surprised even me. I didn't miss him at all. Not one bit. I drove straight back to Wanda's trailer. Inside, Emily was asleep on the couch with Captain Bun tucked under one arm. Caleb had found the rabbit at a church donation bin 2 months earlier and brought it home because Emma got weird sad when she saw it. I stood there staring at that crooked stuffed rabbit while Wanda lowered the TV volume. "How'd dinner go?" she asked. I held up my phone. "Good enough." Then my phone buzzed again. "Marcus." I answered immediately. "You need to come downtown tomorrow," he said. "Why?" A pause. "Because somebody tried to burn a storage unit connected to Daniel's church friend." I went still. "What survived?" Marcus exhaled slowly. "Enough." The storage unit sat behind a pawn shop and a payday loan place off Clinton Highway. That told me almost everything I needed to know before I even got out of the Jeep. Marcus was already there when I arrived the next morning, leaning against his Tahoe with a paper cup of gas station coffee in one hand. Yellow police tape fluttered around the row of units while 2 fire investigators moved in and out carrying plastic bins. The air smelled like wet ash and melted rubber. Marcus handed me a second coffee. "You look terrible," he said. "Good morning to you, too." "You sleep at all?" I stared toward the burned unit. Not really. "Yeah, me neither." That was the closest thing Marcus gave to sympathy most days. He nodded toward the fire marshal. "Small fire. Started intentionally. Somebody used lighter fluid and panicked halfway through." "Trina." "Most likely." I crossed my arms against the cold. "You sure?" Marcus gave me a look. "Rachel, innocent people don't usually set paperwork on fire at 3 in the morning." Fair point. One investigator stepped out carrying a warped cardboard box sealed inside an evidence bag. Marcus lowered his voice. Most of the paper was damaged, but whoever did it wasn't careful enough. Fire destroys edges first. Sometimes the middle survives. I thought about Daniel sitting across from me at Cracker Barrel talking about adaptation like he was discussing cable bills. Something hard settled deeper inside me. Not rage exactly. Clarity. Marcus and I spent the next 2 hours reviewing what investigators had recovered. Some documents were useless now. Burned black around the corners, ink melted into gray smears. But enough remained to paint the picture. False intake forms, temporary guardianship paperwork, financial transfers linked to New Harbor Family Outreach. And then there was the photo. The second Marcus handed it to me, my chest tightened so fast I thought I might pass out. Emily sat in a folding chair inside what looked like a church office. Metal desk, cheap beige walls, one fake plant in the corner. Her backpack rested beside her feet. She looked terrified. Not crying. Worse. Quiet. Daniel stood in the background signing something while a woman I recognized from New Harbor smiled at him. The timestamp was January 16th, one day after my daughter's funeral. I stared at the image so long Marcus finally touched my arm. "Rachel." "She was alive," I whispered. "I know." He knew she was scared. Marcus didn't answer. He didn't need to. I slid the photo back into the evidence sleeve carefully, like touching it too hard might hurt her all over again. By the time I got back to Wanda's trailer that afternoon, I was running on caffeine and fury. Emily sat cross-legged on the floor doing math homework with Caleb. The TV played some loud cartoon in the background. For one strange second, the normalcy of it nearly broke me harder than the evidence had. My daughter should have been complaining about multiplication tables this whole time. Instead, she'd spent a year believing her mother abandoned her. Wanda noticed my face immediately. "You find something bad?" I handed her the copy of the photo. She looked at it once and muttered, "Lord help me, I might actually go to jail before I die." Caleb peeked over her shoulder. "That's Mr. Daniel." Emily froze. Not dramatically, not movie style. Her pencil just stopped moving. Slowly she looked up at me. "You saw Daddy?" The words still came naturally to her. That hurt too. I sat down carefully across from her. "Yeah, baby, I saw him." She stared at the carpet. "Is he mad?" "No." That answer came too fast. We both knew it. Emily twisted the edge of her sleeve around her finger. At the church place, she said quietly, "They told me Daddy was fixing paperwork so I could stay somewhere safe." My jaw tightened. "What church place?" She shrugged one shoulder. "The white building. Kids remember feelings before addresses." I softened my voice. "Did anybody hurt you there?" Emily thought about it. "No." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "But they yelled a lot," she added. "And they locked the pantry at night because some kids stole food." Wanda closed her eyes briefly. Emily kept talking in that careful little voice children use when they're trying not to upset adults. "One lady said military moms don't stay. She said eventually they all leave." I looked down at my hands before Emily could see my face crack open. Because here's the ugly truth nobody likes saying out loud. Part of Emily had believed it because I had been gone a lot. Not abandoned her gone, but gone enough for a scared child to wonder sometimes. Deployments, trainings, late-night calls, missed birthdays, video chats freezing in bad Wi-Fi zones halfway across the world. I served my country proudly. But pride doesn't erase absence. That realization sat heavy in my chest, while Emily quietly erased a math problem too hard enough to tear the paper. Later that night, after the kids went to sleep, Marcus came by again. He spread documents across Wanda's kitchen table while she made coffee strong enough to remove paint. "We're close," he said. "To charges. To pressure." He pointed at a series of bank records tied to Daniel and New Harbor. Small transfers. Not huge amounts. Just enough to look charitable unless somebody lined up all the dates. Payments before Emily's intake. Payments after legal filings. One transfer from Trina. Marcus tapped the table. "People get sloppy when they think nobody's watching." Wanda snorted. "And stupid when they think they're smarter than women." Marcus actually smiled at that. "A rare event. We need one clean public hit," he said. "Something undeniable." I leaned back in the chair. My knee throbbed from the cold weather. "What's Daniel doing this weekend?" Marcus slid another flyer toward me. "A church charity banquet. Fundraiser dinner for vulnerable children and family outreach services. Guest speaker, Daniel Mercer." I laughed before I could stop myself. Not happy laughter. Just disbelief at the nerve of evil sometimes. "He's fundraising off this?" I asked. "Looks like." Wanda read the flyer and muttered, "Oh, I am absolutely wearing my good earrings for this nonsense." For the first time in weeks, I felt something besides grief. Purpose. Not revenge yet. Closer to aim. The banquet was scheduled for Saturday night at a church event hall outside Knoxville. Local business owners, church donors, community people. The exact kind of room where Daniel loved pretending to be respectable. Marcus looked at me carefully. "You sure you can stay controlled?" I thought about Cracker Barrel. About throwing up in the bathroom because I hated my ex-husband enough to scare myself. Then I thought about Emily asleep in the next room with one hand still clutching that stuffed rabbit. "Yes," I said quietly. This time I meant it. Marcus gathered the papers into neat stacks. "Good," he said, "because Saturday night we bury his version of the story." Saturday night came cold and clear. East Tennessee skies get sharp in November. The kind of cold that sneaks through denim and settles into your joints. By the time I parked outside Fellowship Community Church, my knee already ached hard enough to make me limp. Wanda noticed immediately. "You walking like that because you're nervous," she said, climbing carefully out of my Jeep, "or because you're old?" "Both." "That's fair." She adjusted her pearl earrings in the side mirror like we were headed to bingo instead of a public destruction. The church banquet hall glowed warm against the dark parking lot. Minivans, pickup trucks, Christmas wreath already hanging too early on the front doors. Through the windows I could see round tables with white tablecloths and centerpieces made from fake pine cones and battery candles. Normal. That word kept bothering me through this whole thing. Everything looked normal. That's how bad people survive so long. Marcus arrived separately with 2 investigators from the state. Plain clothes, quiet faces, the kind of people who didn't need to announce authority because they carried it naturally. "You ready?" Marcus asked me. "No." "Good. Means you still have a conscience." Inside the banquet smelled like coffee-baked ham and cheap perfume. Around 60 people filled the room, mostly older church couples, a few local business owners, women carrying casserole energy and men who wore jackets they only pulled out for funerals and weddings. A piano version of Amazing Grace played softly through ceiling speakers. Daniel stood near the stage laughing with the pastor. For one brief second, seeing him smiling almost knocked me sideways. Not because I missed him, because I finally understood how completely he had separated himself from what he'd done. He saw himself as the victim now. That realization chilled me more than the weather outside. Trina spotted me first. Her face lost color immediately. She wore a bright red dress that looked too young for her, and clutched a wine glass like it was emotional support equipment. Daniel turned. Our eyes met across the room. I watched confusion hit him first, then panic, then calculation. Always calculation. He excused himself from the pastor and walked toward me carefully. "Rachel," he said quietly, "I didn't know you were coming. I got invited. Not technically true, but neither was his entire personality." Wanda moved beside me like a tiny old bodyguard in orthopedic shoes. Daniel glanced at her. "Who's this?" "The reason your tires are still inflated," Wanda said. I almost smiled. Almost. Daniel looked back at me, trying to recover his rhythm. "Can we talk privately?" "No." That answer landed harder than shouting would have. People nearby started noticing tension. Conversations softened around us the way they do before storms. Daniel lowered his voice. "Rachel, whatever this is, now's not the time." I looked around the banquet hall, at the smiling church volunteers, at the donation jars, at the little paper angels hanging from the walls with children's names written on them. "It's exactly the time," I said. Before he could answer, the pastor stepped to the microphone. "Good evening, everybody." The room settled. Daniel stared at me one more second, then forced on his public face and walked toward the stage. I sat beside Wanda near the back. Marcus stayed standing along the wall with the investigators. And then the performance began. The pastor talked about service, community, helping vulnerable children, families in crisis. Every word made my skin crawl worse. Then he introduced Daniel. People applauded. My ex-husband walked onto that stage wearing a navy blazer and a smile polished smooth as riverstone. "Thank you," he said warmly. "The last year has taught me a lot about loss." I nearly laughed out loud at the nerve. Daniel spoke for several minutes about grief, resilience, faith, and caring for children who needed guidance. He sounded sincere. That was the terrifying part, because good liars always do. Then he said something that finally made my hands stop shaking. Sometimes God asks us to endure unimaginable pain so we can become better servants to others. That was enough. I looked at Marcus. He nodded once. The pastor stepped back toward the sound table, confused, when Marcus intercepted him quietly and handed over paperwork from the investigators. A few seconds later, the microphone squealed. Daniel frowned. Then the recording started playing through the banquet hall speakers. His own voice filled the room. She was easier to manage once Rachel was overseas. Silence slammed across the tables. Daniel went white. The recording continued. "She'll adapt. Kids always adapt." A woman near the front slowly lowered her fork. Another clip. "If Emily stays hidden long enough, Rachel won't question the trust paperwork." Now people were staring openly. Daniel stumbled toward the sound table. "Turn that off." Too late. Another recording. His voice again. "Rachel cared more about the army than motherhood anyway." The room changed after that. Not loudly. Quietly. That was worse. Older people stopped eating. Church donors looked at each other with the expression people get when betrayal enters the room wearing familiar clothes. One elderly woman stood up slowly and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "I gave money to this." Trina backed toward the exit. Marcus intercepted her gently but firmly. Daniel spotted the investigators and panic finally cracked through his performance. "This is out of context," he snapped. "Rachel's unstable. She's been through combat stress." That was when I stood up. Not dramatic. Not screaming. Just done hiding. The room fell silent as I walked toward the stage. My knee hurt with every step. Good. I wanted to feel this moment honestly. Daniel stared at me like he no longer recognized the woman approaching him. Maybe he didn't. I took the microphone from the stand. "You buried my daughter on paper," I said calmly. "You told this town she was dead. You told her I abandoned her while I was fighting overseas. Nobody moved. Nobody even coughed." I looked directly at Daniel. "But you forgot something. She was alive." Right then the back doors opened. Wanda stepped inside holding Emily's hand. Caleb followed behind them. The sound that moved through the room wasn't loud, just shock spreading person to person. Daniel physically staggered backward. Emily looked smaller under all those eyes, but she kept walking. I crouched beside her. "You don't have to say anything," I whispered. Emily looked at Daniel for a long moment. Then she spoke softly into the silence. "You told me my mama didn't want me anymore." That did it. Not the recordings, not the investigators. That sentence broke him. Because suddenly, everybody in that banquet hall could see exactly what he was. Daniel tried one last time. She's confused, he said desperately. Wanda stepped forward so fast I barely saw her move. Boy, she snapped, I have lived 70 years and this ain't confusion. This is you getting caught. Then she smacked him across the shoulder with her purse. The sound echoed through the hall like a gunshot wrapped in leather. Half the room gasped. One man near the buffet actually muttered, "Damn." Honestly, I think that saved the tension from turning too dark. Police moved in immediately after. One officer guided Daniel's hands behind his back while another read him his rights. Trina started crying near the doorway, insisting she didn't know everything. Nobody looked interested in comforting her. I stood there holding Emily's hand while cameras from somebody's phone recorded the end of my marriage forever. And the strange thing was, I didn't feel victorious. Just tired. Deep down tired. The kind that settles into your bones after carrying grief too long. Outside in the parking lot, cold air hit us hard after the overheated banquet hall. Emily climbed into the passenger seat of my Jeep quietly. I sat behind the steering wheel but couldn't start the engine yet because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. For a minute, neither of us spoke. Then Emily leaned against my arm carefully. "Can we go home now?" she whispered. And for the first time in over a year, I finally knew where home was. The months after Daniel's arrest did not feel like the ending people imagine. There was no clean line where pain stopped and peace began. There were court dates, interviews, school meetings, therapy appointments, and stacks of paperwork that made my kitchen table look like a law office had exploded on it. Daniel faced charges for fraud, false documentation, illegal child placement, financial exploitation, and child endangerment. Trina cooperated because people like Trina always discover morals right around the time handcuffs appear. I stopped caring about every detail of their punishment. Not because I forgave them, because Emily still needed breakfast. That sounds small, but it wasn't. For a long time, revenge had given me direction. Wake up, gather evidence, protect Emily, expose Daniel, keep moving. Then one morning there was no banquet to prepare for, no recording to hide, no Daniel to outsmart. Just me standing in a small kitchen staring at a lunchbox trying to remember whether my daughter liked mustard. I made her sandwich wrong the first week she came home with me. She opened the bread, saw the crust still on, and went quiet. I said I messed that up, didn't I? She nodded carefully like she was afraid the truth might hurt my feelings. I used to cut it off, I said. You did. I took the sandwich back and cut the crust off right there on the counter. She watched me like I was passing a test I should have never failed. That was motherhood after trauma. Not big speeches, just crusts. Just showing up again the next morning. I medically retired from the army that spring. My right knee had been bad for years, my lower back was worse, and sleep had turned into a negotiation I usually lost. The official paperwork listed physical limitations and stress-related symptoms. It did not say, "This woman got her child back," and finally understood she could not keep serving everybody else first. But that would have been more honest. I sold the old house Daniel and I had lived in. Too many ghosts. Too much lemon cleaner. Too many rooms where I had once mistaken silence for stability. Emily and I moved into a modest brick ranch house closer to Wanda's trailer park. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a maple tree out front, and a neighbor named Mr. Pritchard who mowed his lawn at 7:15 every Saturday morning like America depended on it. Wanda approved. "This house don't echo," she said the first time she walked in. "That's your official inspection. That and the water pressure, you passed both." Caleb came over most Saturdays. He and Emily built forts in the living room and ate more pizza rolls than any doctor would recommend. Wanda sat in my recliner with a heating pad on her hips and criticized game shows like she was personally responsible for the contestants' poor choices. Slowly our life got ordinary. Beautifully ordinary. Emily started sleeping with her door open instead of closed, then halfway open, then closed but not locked. She stopped hiding crackers under her pillow. She started leaving drawings on the fridge. One day, while looking for her sneakers, she yelled from the hallway, "Mom, have you seen my blue shoes?" I froze with the dish towel in my hand. She didn't notice. That was the gift. She hadn't planned it, hadn't forced herself. The word just came back on its own like a bird returning to a porch after a long winter. I went into the laundry room and cried into a basket of towels for about 2 minutes. Then I found the shoes. Healing was not pretty all the time. Some nights Emily woke up crying. Some days she got angry at me for leaving the room too long. Sometimes I got impatient and hated myself for it. I had led convoys through hostile roads, but helping with 3rd grade math nearly broke me twice. Still, we kept going. Therapy helped. Time helped. Wanda helped more than she knew. One afternoon I told her I still felt guilty. She was sitting on my porch, shelling peas into a metal bowl, her swollen fingers moving slower than they used to. "Of course you do," she said. "That's your comfort. That's the truth. Guilt shows up when love had nowhere to go. But don't build it a guest room." I thought about that for a long time. Eventually, Emily asked to visit the cemetery. I didn't want to go. But I said yes because boundaries didn't mean hiding from hard things. They meant choosing how to face them. We went on a clear Sunday afternoon. Same cemetery, same old oak section, same gravel road crunching under my tires. The headstone was still there then, but not for long. My lawyer had arranged to have it removed. The cemetery caretaker stood nearby with his tools waiting respectfully. Emily held my hand. She looked at her own name carved in stone. "That's weird," she said. I let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "Yeah, baby, it is." "Are we leaving her here?" I knelt beside her, my knee complaining the whole way down. "No," I said. "We're leaving the lie here. You and me, we're going home." The caretaker removed the stone slowly. No music, no crowd, no speech. Just the sound of metal dirt and the end of something cruel. Emily slipped her hand into mine again. This time she held tight. I used to think strength meant surviving anything without breaking. Now I think strength is knowing when to stop carrying what was never yours to carry. Daniel stole a year from us, but he did not get the rest of our lives. If this story touched you, thank you for listening. Leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. And if you believe in justice, family, and second chances, I'd be honored to have you here for the next story. The tray nearly slipped out of my hands when Colonel Briggs shoved his chair back so hard it slammed into the wall. The whole briefing room went dead quiet. I remember the sound more than anything else. Not the chair, not the officers turning toward me. It was the little crackle from the cheap plastic water bottles rattling against each other while my hands shook. Colonel Nathan Briggs stared at me like he'd seen a ghost. Then he said very slowly, "I've been looking for you for 13 years, Staff Sergeant Mercer." You could feel the air leave the room. Major Denise Holloway looked from him to me so fast I thought she might pull something in her neck. 10 seconds earlier she'd been treating me like part of the furniture. Now suddenly I mattered. And believe me, that scared her more than it scared me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. 3 weeks earlier, I'd driven into Fort Liberty just after sunrise with everything I owned, packed into a gray Ford Explorer that smelled faintly like old coffee and wet dog, because my ex-husband had kept the golden retriever in the divorce, but apparently not the dog hair. North Carolina heat was already climbing, even though it was barely 8 in the morning. Sweat glued my t-shirt to my back while I waited at the gate checkpoint behind a contractor truck carrying portable generators. I remember feeling hopeful. That sounds stupid now. After 15 years in Army logistics, I thought finally getting assigned to a Special Operations Support Command meant somebody had noticed my work. I figured maybe I'd earned my way into something meaningful. Field coordination, recovery planning, operational support. Something with responsibility. Instead, Major Holloway took one look at my file and decided exactly who I was before I even sat down. She was tall, polished, one of those officers who looked expensive even in camouflage. Perfect nails, perfect posture, office smelled like lemon cleaner and black coffee. She flipped through my personnel packet without much interest. "Logistics," she said flatly. "Yes, ma'am." "You ever see direct combat?" "No, ma'am." That little sound told me everything. Not anger, worse. Dismissal. She leaned back in her chair and said, "Well, every unit needs support staff." Support staff, like I was applying to manage a hotel buffet. The first week she kept me out of every operational briefing, every single one. At first I thought maybe it was a clearance issue, or scheduling. Then Thursday morning she handed me a clipboard and said, "Conference room needs restocked waters before regional command arrives tomorrow." I honestly thought she was joking. She wasn't. That became my life for the next few weeks. Coffee setup, visitor escorts, inventory counts nobody else wanted, supply closet audits. Meanwhile, younger soldiers with half my experience got invited into mission prep meetings. One afternoon I passed the operations room and saw a lieutenant I'd trained 2 years earlier standing at the digital board giving recommendations on convoy routing. He avoided eye contact when he saw me carrying copier paper. That one stung more than I expected. The worst part wasn't even Holloway herself. It was how quickly everybody else adapted to her opinion of me. That's the thing people don't tell you about humiliation. Most folks don't join in because they're cruel. They join in because it's easier. A week later, I was setting up coffee for a joint briefing when Holloway walked in with 2 captains behind her. She glanced at the cups and said, "Mercer, make sure the lids are tight this time." I blinked. "Ma'am, last thing we need is another tactical disaster." The captains laughed immediately. Not because it was funny, because she outranked them. I smiled anyway, small, professional. Inside, though, I felt something shrinking. That night, I sat alone in my off-base apartment eating microwave meatloaf from Food Lion while rain tapped against the kitchen window. My apartment still had unpacked boxes stacked near the wall. Half my life looked temporary. I pulled out one of my father's old cassette tapes from a shoebox in the closet. I didn't play it. Just held it for a minute. My father, Master Sergeant Daniel Mercer, disappeared in Afghanistan in 2012, officially listed as killed during an extraction mission. No body recovered. For years, I told myself joining logistics had been practical, stable. Truth was, I never stopped trying to understand what happened to him. A few days later, I met Earl Watkins. Earl worked nights cleaning administrative buildings around the command offices. Vietnam veteran, 70-something years old. Walked with a limp and wore old flannel shirts under his maintenance vest, no matter how hot it got. First time we talked, I was refilling bottled water in the conference room at almost 9 at night. Earl watched me stack cases for a minute and said, "You got the posture of somebody trying not to punch people." I laughed before I could stop myself. That was probably why I liked him immediately. Over the next couple weeks, Earl became the only person on base who talked to me like I still existed. One night, he found me staring at a shipment report in the supply office. "What's bothering you?" he asked. I pointed at the screen. "Fuel requests." "What about 'em?" "These timestamps are wrong." He leaned closer. I showed him duplicate authorization numbers tied to overnight emergency transfers. Could have been paperwork mistakes. Could have been nothing. But logistics teaches you patterns. And once you see a pattern, it's hard to unsee it. Earl studied me quietly. Then he said, "Places like this don't fear loud people." I looked over. "They fear useful people." That line stayed with me. A few days later, I overheard 2 younger specialists talking outside the vending machines. One of these days, they'll promote her to head waitress. The other guy snorted. "Maybe she can deploy paper towels into combat." I kept walking like I hadn't heard them. About an hour later, one of those same soldiers stopped by my desk looking nervous. Staff Sergeant Mercer." "Yeah." "You're good with payroll systems, right?" Turns out his housing allowance paperwork got messed up and finance had been ignoring him for weeks. I fixed it in 15 minutes. Before he left, he said quietly, "Thanks." Didn't apologize, though. People usually don't. Then came the regional command meeting. Big room, senior officers everywhere. Air smelled like coffee and printer toner. I was carrying a tray of bottled water toward the main table while Holloway reviewed briefing folders near the projector screen. She glanced at me and muttered, "Just set them down and stay out of the way." Then Colonel Briggs looked up. And everything changed. Nobody moved for a second after Colonel Briggs said my name. You could hear the projector humming against the far wall. Major Holloway recovered first. She stepped toward me, fast voice clipped and irritated. "Staff Sergeant Mercer. I specifically instructed you to leave the trays and exit the room." Briggs didn't even look at her. "Major," he said calmly, "do you have any idea who works under you?" That shut the room down even harder. I remember standing there holding a half-empty tray like an idiot while 12 senior officers stared at me. Holloway's expression changed almost instantly, not softer, sharper. "Careful." "No, sir," she said slowly. Briggs finally stood up fully. He was older than I expected up close. Late 60s, maybe. Thick gray hair, broad shoulders, the kind of face that looked carved out of old wood. He carried himself like somebody who'd spent 40 years making decisions nobody else wanted. He looked at me for a long moment. "You're Daniel Mercer's daughter." It wasn't a question. My throat tightened before I could answer. "Yes, sir." One of the officers near the end of the table frowned slightly. "Mercer." Briggs ignored him. "How long have you been assigned here?" 3 weeks, sir." His jaw flexed once. Then he looked directly at Holloway. "Interesting." That one word hit harder than yelling would've. Holloway straightened immediately. "Sir, Staff Sergeant Mercer was assigned temporary support responsibilities while we evaluated." Briggs cut her off. "Bring your briefing folders," he told the room. "We'll reconvene in 20. Nobody argued. As officers started filing out, I bent awkwardly to collect water bottles from the table. Briggs stopped me. "Leave those." I froze. "Yes, sir." Holloway gave me a look that could have stripped paint off concrete. That was the moment I realized something important. She wasn't embarrassed. She was nervous. A young captain escorted me down the hallway about 10 minutes later to Briggs's office on the second floor. The whole walk there, people kept glancing at me. Amazing how quickly your value changes once somebody powerful notices you. Briggs's office surprised me. Smaller than I expected. No giant patriotic displays, no polished museum feel. Just old wood shelves, stacks of paper files, black coffee, and framed photos from deployments going back decades. One photo caught my eye immediately. My father, younger, thinner, standing beside Briggs in desert gear somewhere overseas. I stopped walking. Briggs noticed. That was Kandahar, he said quietly. 2011. I stared at the picture so long I almost forgot to breathe. I hadn't seen that image before. For years, all the Army gave us were formal portraits and folded condolences. Not real life. Not moments. He talked about you constantly, Briggs said. That almost broke me right there. Instead, I asked, why do you know my name? Briggs motioned for me to sit. Then he did something strange. He opened a manila folder already sitting on his desk. Inside was my career history. Transfers, evaluations, commendations. Every assignment I'd had for over a decade. I arranged your transfer, he said. I blinked hard. Sir, you didn't end up here by accident. My stomach tightened. For 13 years, he continued, I've been trying to figure out who Daniel Mercer trusted before he disappeared. I stared at him. He trusted paperwork, Briggs said. Records, timelines, details, things most people overlook. That sounded exactly like my father. When you entered logistics, Briggs continued, I started paying attention. I honestly didn't know what to say. Part of me felt angry suddenly. You tracked my career. I monitored it. That's not better. To my surprise, Briggs almost smiled. No, he admitted. Probably not. Then his expression hardened again. Your father discovered financial irregularities during a recovery operation in Afghanistan in 2012. I leaned forward slowly. The room suddenly felt smaller. Officially, Briggs said the mission failed during extraction. Ambush, casualties, missing personnel. That's what they told us. It wasn't the whole story. My chest tightened hard enough to hurt. Briggs stood and walked toward the window overlooking the parking lot below. There were civilian contractors attached to supply movement operations, he said. Emergency authorizations, missing funds, duplicate routing approvals. Every word sounded familiar to me already. Not because I knew the story. Because I'd seen similar patterns myself. Even recently. Briggs turned back toward me. Your father started documenting discrepancies. And then he disappeared. The silence after that felt heavy. I looked down at my hands. You think somebody killed him? Briggs took a long breath before answering. I think good soldiers were sacrificed to protect expensive people. That sentence stayed with me. Still does. He sat back down slowly. Before Daniel vanished, he mailed several cassette tapes to a private address connected to your family. I swallowed. I still have some. His eyes sharpened immediately. How many? 6. There should be 7. That hit me like ice water. How do you know that? Because your father told me. I stared at him. He called me 2 nights before the operation, Briggs said quietly. Said if anything happened to him, the truth would survive in pieces. I felt suddenly dizzy. All those years I thought the tapes were personal keepsakes, stories, rambles. My father talking about weather and army chow and bad coffee overseas. I never imagined they might be evidence. Briggs leaned forward. Staff Sergeant Mercer. Did anyone besides you know you kept those tapes? I opened my mouth, stopped. Then I remembered the supply closet. 2 days earlier, Holloway had walked in while I was reorganizing old storage bins near my desk. One cassette tape had briefly fallen from my bag onto the floor. She'd picked it up herself. What's this? She'd asked casually. Old family stuff? She handed it back. But her eyes lingered. Now my pulse started climbing. I may have made a mistake, I said quietly. Briggs's expression changed immediately. Go check your quarters. I drove back to my apartment faster than I should have. Rain clouds were rolling over Fayetteville by then, turning the sky dark gray. Halfway up the apartment stairs, I already knew something was wrong. My door wasn't fully closed. Not wide open. Just slightly off. Enough. I stopped breathing for a second. Then I pushed it open carefully. Nothing looked destroyed. That somehow made it worse. Whoever came inside knew exactly what they wanted. Closet door cracked open. Storage box shifted sideways. My mattress slightly lifted. I walked straight to the shoebox near the back shelf. Opened it. 5 tapes, not 6. One was gone. And suddenly, for the first time since arriving at Fort Liberty, I understood this wasn't workplace humiliation anymore. Somebody was scared. I barely slept that night. Every sound outside my apartment snapped me awake. Car doors, footsteps, somebody's muffler rattling in the parking lot around 2 in the morning. By sunrise, I'd given up trying. I sat at my kitchen counter drinking burnt coffee from a chipped army mug while staring at the 5 cassette tapes lined up beside the toaster like evidence in a murder trial. For 13 years, they'd been memories. Now they felt dangerous. I drove onto base just before 7. Gray clouds hung low over Fort Liberty, and the whole place smelled like wet pavement and diesel fuel. I went straight to Major Holloway's office. She didn't even look up when I knocked. "Make it quick, Mercer." I shut the door behind me. Someone broke into my apartment. That got her attention. Slightly. She leaned back in her chair, expression blank. "Were valuables taken?" "One item." "What item?" I hesitated. "A personal family tape." Her eyes flickered for half a second. Tiny movement. But I saw it. "And you're reporting this because my door was forced open." "Did you contact local police?" "Yes, ma'am. And they found no clear signs of theft besides the missing item." Holloway folded her hands neatly across her desk. "Staff sergeant people going through divorces, transfers, stress-related adjustment periods sometimes become overly suspicious." I stared at her. "My apartment was searched." "Or," she said calmly, "you misplaced something emotionally important and want the situation to feel larger than it is." That was the first moment I genuinely disliked her. Not because she insulted me, because she did it so professionally. I left without arguing. As I stepped into the hallway, I heard her office door lock behind me. That stayed with me too. The next few days got strange. Not dramatic. Worse. Quiet. My base credentials suddenly stopped working at buildings I'd already been cleared for. Inventory files I'd reviewed disappeared from shared systems. One afternoon I opened a supply spreadsheet and found entire shipment logs erased overnight. When I asked IT, they claimed the records had never existed. That bothered me more than direct threats would have. Because somebody wasn't trying to scare me. They were trying to make me doubt myself. Thursday evening, I found a folded yellow sticky note inside my desk drawer. 3 words: "Stop digging!" No signature. No handwriting I recognized. I sat there staring at it while fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because after years of being invisible, suddenly somebody considered me dangerous enough to warn. That night, I found Earl cleaning hallway floors outside the admin wing. He took one look at my face and said, "Well, either you discovered corruption or the chow hall switched to powdered eggs again." I handed him the note. He read it silently. "Cute," he muttered. "You think I'm overreacting?" "No," he said immediately. "I think somebody finally realized you notice things." Earl had worked on base long enough to know where old security backups were stored. Around 9 that night, we sat inside a cramped maintenance office drinking vending machine coffee while he pulled hallway footage from an older archived system. "You'd be amazed what survives because nobody updates government computers," he muttered. The footage quality looked terrible. Grainy black and white timestamps. Hallways flickering under motion sensors. At one point, Earl suddenly paused the screen. "Well," he said, "that explains the disappearing protein bars." A lieutenant colonel appeared on camera sneaking into a break room refrigerator around midnight, stuffing chocolate peanut butter bars into his cargo pockets. I laughed so hard coffee nearly came out my nose. "I knew it," Earl said proudly. "Man's been stealing snacks since Easter." For about 30 seconds, everything felt normal again. Then the hallway footage shifted to my building. A figure appeared near my apartment corridor just after midnight 2 nights earlier. Face hidden under a hood. But the jacket was visible. Command staff issue. Special Operations Support insignia. Earl froze the frame. "You recognize it?" I nodded slowly. Major Holloway's section used those jackets during field inspections. Could have belonged to anyone in her command. But it wasn't random anymore. I drove home uneasy that night. Not frightened exactly. More like watched. The next morning, Colonel Briggs summoned me again. This time he skipped small talk entirely. "Your father knew the operation reports were altered. He said the second I sat down." Rain tapped softly against his office windows. He slid a folder toward me. Inside were old contractor payment records from Afghanistan. Most people would have fallen asleep looking at them. I didn't. Duplicate invoice numbers. Emergency fuel reimbursements approved twice. Storage facilities billed that didn't exist anymore. The same kind of patterns I'd already noticed at Fort Liberty. Briggs studied me quietly while I flipped pages. "You see it?" "Yeah." He saw it too. I swallowed hard. Briggs leaned back slowly. The contractors involved had connections to senior command structures, political people, expensive people. You think my father threatened them? I think he made himself inconvenient. That sentence hit harder than dramatic words ever could. Inconvenient. Like human beings could simply become administrative problems. Briggs rubbed his jaw tiredly. Daniel started documenting everything independently. He trusted systems more than people. That sounds like him. He believed records eventually betray liars. For a while, neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked quietly, "Why didn't you tell my family any of this before now?" Briggs looked older suddenly. Because I couldn't prove it. That answer felt honest. Painfully honest. That night back at my apartment, I finally played one of the cassette tapes again for the first time in years. Static crackled softly. Then my father's voice filled the room. Calm, familiar. "Hey kiddo," he said, "if this tape reached you, military mail still moves slower than frozen syrup." I laughed before tears hit me. I sat on my kitchen floor listening while rain hit the windows outside. My father talked about terrible coffee overseas, dust storms, how he missed North Carolina barbecue. Then his tone shifted slightly. "If something ever feels wrong," he said quietly, "pay attention to paperwork. Numbers tell on people." I closed my eyes hard. For years I thought he was rambling. Now every sentence sounded deliberate. Around midnight I finally shut the tape off and headed to bed. I almost missed it. A pair of headlights sitting across the apartment parking lot. Engine running. Not moving. Watching. The car pulled away slowly once my bedroom light switched off. I stood there in the dark for a long time afterward. And for the first time I started believing somebody truly wanted this buried. The strange thing about being underestimated for long enough is, eventually people stop hiding things around you. That was the mistake Major Holloway made. By then, most people at the command barely looked at me anymore unless they needed coffee refilled or a spreadsheet fixed. I'd become background noise. Harmless, forgettable. And honestly, part of me had started believing it too. But after the break-in and the missing tape, something changed in me. I stopped trying to earn respect. That sounds simple, but it wasn't. For weeks, I'd kept hoping if I worked harder, stayed calmer, proved myself enough. Eventually, somebody would see me differently. Then, one morning, I caught my reflection in the supply office microwave door while reheating oatmeal, and I realized I looked tired all the time. Small. Careful. Like somebody asking permission to exist. I was done with that. So instead of chasing approval, I started paying attention. Real attention. Not just to people. To systems. Most folks think logistics is boring because they only notice it when it fails. But movement tells stories. Fuel, shipping manifests, maintenance requests, emergency authorizations. Every bad decision leaves fingerprints somewhere. And Fort Liberty had fingerprints everywhere. I started arriving early before most of the admin staff came in. Around 6:30, the building stayed quiet except for vending machines humming and the cleaning crews moving through hallways. That gave me time. I built timelines first. Shipment transfers, contractor approvals, overnight routing changes. At first, the irregularities looked random. Then patterns emerged. The same emergency vendor IDs kept appearing during after-hours authorization windows. Maintenance requests were being altered after audit reviews. Fuel transfers were approved for vehicles that had already been decommissioned. And somebody kept rerouting equipment through storage facilities that technically didn't exist anymore. That part bothered me the most. Fake locations meant somebody expected nobody to check physical inventory, which usually meant money, big money. One Tuesday morning, I sat at my desk staring at a shipment chain when Earl walked by carrying a mop bucket. "You got your war face on," he muttered. "I think somebody's laundering contract payments through dead storage sites." Earl stopped walking. "Well," he said, "that's definitely more exciting than my morning." I turned the monitor slightly toward him. "These approval windows happen almost entirely overnight. Meaning whoever's signing them doesn't want daytime visibility." Earl whistled softly. "You know, he said most people would have transferred out by now." "Thought about it. But..." I leaned back in my chair. "My father used to say if something ugly survives long enough, it starts depending on everybody being tired." Earl nodded slowly like that made perfect sense. Then he pointed his coffee cup toward me. "That right there. That's why people like Holloway fear people like you." I didn't answer, because part of me still wasn't sure I wanted to believe that. A few days later, Holloway called me into a command review meeting unexpectedly. Not to participate. To handle paperwork. There were 6 officers around the conference table discussing supply readiness reports, while I stood near the sidewall organizing folders. Halfway through the meeting, Holloway started presenting revised equipment readiness percentages. As she spoke, I noticed one of her transfer totals didn't match the corrected inventory logs I'd reviewed earlier that morning. Just a small discrepancy. But enough. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to stay quiet. The other part was tired of shrinking. "Ma'am," I said carefully. Holloway stopped mid-sentence. "What?" The room turned toward me immediately. I kept my voice calm. "I think the transfer total on page 4 still includes the retired vehicle inventory from March." Silence. One colonel flipped pages. Another officer frowned down at his report. Then somebody quietly said, "She's right." Holloway's expression tightened instantly. Not explosive anger. Worse. Embarrassment. She corrected herself quickly and moved on, but the room had shifted. People noticed. Afterward, she cornered me near the hallway printers. "You enjoy making me look incompetent." "No, ma'am." "Then learn when to keep your mouth shut." I met her eyes carefully. "With respect, ma'am, inaccurate logistics reports become operational problems." For one second, I thought she might actually slap me. Instead, she stepped closer and lowered her voice. "You think being clever makes you dangerous?" That sentence landed strangely, not mocking. Personal. Then she walked away. That night, I couldn't stop replaying it. Around 10, I drove to a storage facility outside Spring Lake where I kept old family boxes from after my divorce. Rain hammered the metal roof while I dug through dusty containers under flickering lights. Old uniforms, tax records, my father's fishing gear. Then I found the toolbox. Rusty red metal, heavy as concrete. I almost overlooked it, until I remembered something from childhood. My father hiding important things in places nobody important ever cleaned. Under garage shelves, inside old tackle boxes, beneath loose floorboards. People only search places they think matter, he used to tell me. My pulse picked up. I opened the toolbox slowly. Inside sat old wrenches, electrical tape, faded mechanic gloves, and one cassette tape wrapped in a shop rag. Number 7. I just stared at it for a second. After 13 years, I sat down right there on the concrete floor while rain pounded outside. Then my phone rang. "Colonel Briggs." "You found something," he said immediately. "How did you know?" "Because your voice changed." I looked down at the tape in my hand. I found the last cassette. Long silence. Then Briggs exhaled slowly. "Listen to me carefully, Rachel." That was the first time he'd used my first name. "Whatever's on that tape," he continued, "people buried careers to keep hidden." I leaned back against the storage wall. "You think Holloway knows?" Another pause. Then Briggs said quietly, "I think Denise Holloway knew exactly who you were the day you arrived." Cold moved through my stomach. Suddenly, all the humiliation made sense. The isolation. The meaningless assignments. The way she kept me out of briefings. She wasn't dismissing me. She was containing me. I closed my eyes hard. All those weeks I thought I was being treated like I didn't matter. But the truth was much worse. I mattered enough to scare somebody. The second regional command meeting happened on a Thursday morning. Bright sun, clear skies, humid enough to make your uniform stick to your back before 8 a.m. I remember stupid details when I'm nervous. The smell of burnt coffee drifting down the hallway. Somebody laughing too loudly near the elevators. The squeak of my shoes against polished tile while I carried another tray of bottled water toward Conference Room B. By then, word had spread that Colonel Briggs had taken an interest in me. Nobody knew why exactly, but people noticed changes fast in military buildings. Soldiers who ignored me for weeks suddenly nodded hello. A captain held the door open for me that morning like I was suddenly a person again. Funny how rank works even when it's borrowed. Inside the conference room, officers shuffled through briefing folders, while Major Holloway stood near the projection screen reviewing notes. Perfect uniform. Perfect posture. But she looked tired. The kind of tired people get when they haven't slept because they know something's coming and can't stop it. She saw me enter with the water tray and gave a small smirk. "Right on time, Mercer." I didn't answer. I just started setting bottles along the table. One of the lieutenant colonels muttered under his breath, "Careful, she might audit the water inventory." A few people chuckled politely. I noticed Holloway didn't. Then Colonel Briggs walked in. No greeting. No small talk. He closed the conference room door behind him and said, "Before we begin, Staff Sergeant Mercer will remain in the room." That got everybody's attention immediately. Holloway spoke carefully. "Sir Mercer isn't cleared for portions of this briefing." She is now. Flat, final. Briggs walked to the head of the table carrying a thin manila folder and an old cassette player. An actual cassette player. You could practically feel the confusion in the room. One officer even gave a quiet laugh. "Sir," another man said cautiously, "what exactly is this regarding?" Briggs sat down slowly. "Accountability." Nobody spoke after that. I stood near the side wall, gripping the edge of the tray harder than I realized. My pulse hammered so loudly I thought people might hear it. Briggs looked toward me. "Rachel." "Not Mercer." "Rachel, play the tape." Every eye in the room turned toward me. For 1 second, I honestly considered walking out. Not because I was scared of Holloway anymore. Because I suddenly understood this was the point where things stopped being reversible. Once truth enters a room, it doesn't leave quietly. I walked to the cassette player and slid tape number 7 into place. The click sounded impossibly loud. Then static filled the room. A few officers shifted impatiently. And then my father's voice came through the speakers. Calm, steady, tired. If this recording gets played, he said, it means somebody finally stopped ignoring the numbers. Every person in that room went still. My chest tightened so hard it physically hurt hearing him again. Certain supply contracts tied to recovery operations have been altered, my father continued. Emergency authorizations rerouted through unauthorized civilian vendors. Duplicate fuel reimbursements approved through command protection. One of the officers frowned deeply. Another started flipping through paperwork. My father kept talking. No dramatic speeches. No conspiracy theory nonsense. Just details. Dates. Shipment IDs. Authorization codes. That was the thing about my father. He trusted evidence more than emotion. The tape ended after about 6 minutes. Silence swallowed the room afterward. Briggs looked toward me once. I knew that was my cue. My hands shook slightly while I connected my laptop to the conference projector. Then I pulled up the timeline I'd spent weeks building. Shipment records, transfer approvals, maintenance revisions, contractor payments routed through facilities that no longer existed. I walked them through everything slowly. No theatrics. Just paperwork. At one point, a colonel near the far end interrupted quietly. These authorization chains overlap command review windows. Yes, sir, I answered. Another officer leaned closer toward the screen. These signatures were modified after audit submission. Yes, sir. Nobody laughed anymore. Nobody smirked at the woman who carried water trays. Because suddenly the room understood something ugly. The support staff had been paying attention while everybody else was busy protecting reputations. Halfway through the presentation, Briggs finally turned toward Holloway. Would you care to explain your involvement, Major? Holloway stayed perfectly still for several seconds. Then she inhaled carefully. My involvement, she said evenly, was administrative continuity. Briggs's expression didn't change. You buried discrepancies. I stabilized command exposure. You altered reports. I corrected operational vulnerabilities. The room felt electric now. Like everybody understood they were watching a career collapse in real time. Holloway finally looked directly at me. And for the first time since I met her, she seemed honest. You want to know the truth, Mercer, she said quietly. Nobody interrupted her. You know what happens to women in commands like this when they hesitate. When they show uncertainty, they get eaten alive. Her voice sharpened slightly. I spent 22 years surviving officers who smiled in my face while waiting for me to fail. She pointed toward the documents on the screen. You think any of those men would have protected me if I'd exposed this? One of the senior officers shifted uncomfortably. Because deep down, everybody in that room knew she wasn't entirely wrong. Holloway looked back at Briggs. So yes, she continued, I protected command structure, I protected careers, including my own. Then her eyes moved to me again. And when Rachel Mercer arrived here acting exactly like Daniel Mercer, noticing patterns, asking quiet questions, I knew what was coming. There it was. The truth. Not hatred. Fear. Briggs leaned forward slightly. So you isolated her intentionally. Holloway gave a tiny laugh without humor. I made her invisible. That sentence landed harder than yelling ever could. For a second, nobody moved. Then Briggs asked the final question. Did you believe humiliating Staff Sergeant Mercer would prevent the truth from surfacing? Holloway's composure finally cracked. Just slightly. Enough. She looked exhausted suddenly. Old. Yes, she admitted softly. Silence. One officer removed his glasses slowly. Another rubbed both hands across his face. Nobody looked triumphant. That's the strange thing about real corruption. It doesn't feel cinematic when it collapses. It feels sad. Briggs stood carefully. Major Denise Holloway, he said, you are hereby relieved pending formal investigation. Holloway closed her eyes briefly. Then she nodded once like she'd known this moment was coming for years. Military police arrived quietly a few minutes later. No handcuffs. No dramatic scene. She simply picked up her uniform cap and walked toward the door. But before leaving, she paused beside me. You know the worst part? She asked quietly. I didn't answer. She looked toward the officers around the table. They'll respect you now." Then she walked out. The room stayed silent after the door closed. I stood there holding my father's final cassette tape while senior officers avoided my eyes. And for the first time since arriving at Fort Liberty, nobody looked through me anymore. Fort Liberty got very quiet after the investigation started. Not publicly. Publicly, everything looked normal. Morning formations still happened. Humvees still rolled across base roads. Officers still carried coffee into meetings pretending the world made sense. But underneath all that, everybody knew. You could feel it in the hallways. Conversations stopping when certain names came up. People suddenly double-checking paperwork they used to rubber stamp. Senior officers retiring for family reasons. Contractors quietly disappearing from approved vendor lists. The Army has a way of swallowing scandals without making much noise, like a man smoothing dirt over a fresh hole before the neighbors wake up. A week after the conference room meeting, Major Holloway officially resigned. No dramatic headlines, no televised disgrace. Just a short internal memo citing personal reasons. Still, people talked. They always do. What surprised me most was how many soldiers suddenly acted like they'd supported me all along. One captain stopped me near the parking lot and said I always knew something about Holloway felt off, which was interesting considering he laughed at her jokes for 3 straight weeks. Another officer shook my hand in the commissary and called me one hell of an investigator. I wasn't an investigator. I was a logistics NCO who got tired of being treated like office decoration. That part mattered to me. Because people love rewriting history once the outcome becomes safe. Colonel Briggs kept me mostly out of the public fallout. I appreciated that. I sat through 2 formal interviews with investigators from Army Criminal Investigation Division, mostly paperwork clarification, shipment chains, authorization records. The funny thing was, none of the evidence looked dramatic on its own. That's how corruption survives. Not through giant movie-style crimes. Tiny compromises. One altered timestamp here. One ignored discrepancy there. 100 people deciding not to ask questions because asking questions slows careers down. One afternoon after an interview session, Briggs walked with me across the parking lot toward headquarters. Humidity hung thick over everything, thunderstorms rolling somewhere in the distance. "You did good work," he said quietly. I gave a tired laugh. "Funny, a month ago people trusted me with bottled water." Briggs glanced sideways at me. People often confuse visibility with value. That sounded like something he'd spent years learning the hard way. We stopped near his vehicle. "There's something else," he said. Then he handed me a folder. Inside was a formal offer for reassignment. Strategic Operations Analysis Division. Permanent position. Better pay, better housing allowance, bigger responsibilities. The kind of assignment people spend careers chasing. And to my own surprise, my first reaction wasn't excitement. It was exhaustion. That night, I sat alone in my apartment staring at the paperwork while an old episode of Wheel of Fortune played quietly on television in the background. I should have been happy. Instead, I kept thinking about Holloway. Not because I forgave her. I didn't. But part of me understood her now in a way I hadn't before. She didn't start out cruel. Nobody does. Somewhere along the line, she learned survival mattered more than truth. Then eventually, she stopped seeing the difference. And honestly, that scared me more than corruption itself. Because it felt human. A few evenings later, I found Earl outside the admin building smoking one of his terrible cigars beside the loading dock. "You look miserable for somebody who won," he said. I leaned against the railing beside him. "I don't know if I did win." Earl laughed softly. "That's because you're thinking like a decent person." We stood there quietly for a minute, listening to cicadas buzzing in the trees beyond the parking lot. Finally, I asked, "Did Vietnam mess you up?" Earl took a slow drag before answering. "Vietnam taught me institutions fail constantly." He shrugged. "Still got good people, though." "That enough?" "Usually has to be." He looked over at me carefully. "You know what your problem is, Rachel?" "What?" "You still think disappointment means something wasn't worth believing in." I didn't answer because I knew he was right. A few days later, before sunrise, I drove north toward Arlington National Cemetery. Long drive. Too much time to think. Virginia skies looked pale gray when I arrived. Cool breeze moving through the rows of white headstones. I found my father's grave near the older trees. Master Sergeant Daniel Mercer. I stood there for a long time without speaking. Then I sat on the grass beside the headstone and pulled out the final cassette tape. Not the whole thing. Just the ending. My father's voice crackled softly through the headphones. "If you're hearing this, kiddo, he said it means you kept going." I closed my eyes. For years I thought strength looked loud. Confident people. Aggressive people. command voices in briefing rooms. But my father understood something I didn't fully grasp until Fort Liberty. Real strength usually arrives quietly. It notices details. It stays patient. And it keeps telling the truth long after lying becomes more convenient. I placed my hand against the cold marble headstone. Then I finally said the thing I should have said years earlier. I found it, Dad. Wind moved softly through the cemetery trees. For the first time in a very long while, I felt steady. Not triumphant. Not healed completely. Just steady. A month later, I accepted the reassignment. Not because the army suddenly became perfect. It didn't. But because people like Holloway only understood power when it was loud. My father taught me something different. Useful people matter too, even when nobody notices them at first. And maybe especially then. If you've ever been underestimated, I hope you remember this: other people don't get to decide your worth for you. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one paying closest attention. Thank you for spending this time with me tonight. I'll see you in the next story.